The day dawned in pale gold over the spires of King's Landing, each turret and tower kissed by the faintest blush of early light. Even the waters of Blackwater Bay shone with quiet promise, as if foreshadowing a rebirth or an unlooked-for miracle. In the Red Keep's highest chamber, once scorched by dragonfire and battered by battles, now newly restored under an era of fragile hope, Daenerys Targaryen brushed her fingers across the cheek of her infant son. She could feel the warmth of him, his soft breath against her neck, the gentle beat of his tiny heart. When she glanced at Jon Snow, still known to many in the North by that name despite the revelations of his lineage, his gray eyes held the same wonder as hers. They had named the boy Aemon in honor of those who came before, yet also in hope he would forge a new path. In her heart, Daenerys believed he could be a unifying force in a realm long shattered by strife. She remembered the bitterness of the war, the nights spent trembling at the sound of unsheathed steel, the searing chill that threatened to devour the living beyond the wall. She remembered the betrayal she felt upon learning truths that should have bound them but threatened to tear them apart. Yet somehow, through that treacherous labyrinth of ambition, alliances, and heartbreak, Daenerys and Jon had found their way to each other. Their child was more than a symbol, he was life made flesh, the culmination of ice and fire. And though the Iron Throne had melted beneath dragon flame, the realm itself still needed guidance. Daenerys felt a pang of guilt for all she had done in pursuit of that twisted seed of swords, yet hope welled within her. There could be no greater redemption, she told herself, than shepherding a peaceful era into being. A cry from afar broke the stillness. The roar of a dragon cut through the silence. Daenerys' heart clenched. It was Viserion. Once she had thought him lost forever. The Night King had turned him into an undead beast, forcing him to destroy the wall. But in this reimagined turn of fate, this improbable thread in the grand tapestry, Viserion survived. Regal, too, soared over the bay, his wings carving arcs across the sky. Drogon was not alone, and Daenerys felt that old surge of comfort and strength whenever she beheld her children of flame. The dragons had grown older, wiser, but it was not only they who patrolled the heavens now. In the dark corners of the Red Keep's catacombs, hidden away for years, dozens of eggs had lain dormant, some calcified into stone, others apparently brimming with new life. No one had guessed at the myriad clutches. Some claimed the Mad King had once hoarded them, others said they were spoils from old Valyria discovered by Aegon the Conqueror and sealed away. Regardless of their origin, the day had come when one egg cracked, then another, then another. Before the startled eyes of dragonkeepers and maesters, an entire generation of dragons hatched into the world once more. Tiny and screeching, they had grown rapidly, nurtured by Daenerys' unwavering care and guided by the presence of the older trio. It was as though the essence of the Targaryen birthright had burst forth, unstoppable, demanding a place in a realm that had so nearly forgotten it. Jon, who had spent so long grappling with identity, found his own sense of purpose in caring for the newly hatched beasts. He saw them not as instruments of power but as living creatures, each one with a soul as valid as any man or woman of Westeros. His gentle approach tempered Daenerys' fierce protection, and theirs became a joint guardianship. Together, they ensured the dragons were neither neglected nor unleashed as weapons of conquest. Instead, they were living testaments to a new age, an age in which Targaryens would not merely take but also give back to the realm. Even Grey Worm, distant though he was since the final battles, had returned to witness this spectacle of life. And though his gaze upon Daenerys remained complicated, the arrival of Aemon and the blossoming of new dragons softened even the unsullied commander's steeled heart. Beyond the ramparts of King's Landing, the realm stirred. Shadows of doubt lingered in the corners of every hall. Men recalled the flames that had devoured the capital, the illusions that had once driven Daenerys to the brink. Skepticism was the currency of the small folk who had survived the war, and they held it tightly. But there was also a subtle reverence, a whispered belief that the child of Jon and Daenerys might indeed herald a fresh beginning. Daenerys summoned the lords to King's Landing. One by one, they arrived, skeptical, bristling with old loyalties or grudges. Sansa Stark, Lady of the North, came with her retinue, traveling on roads that still carried traces of winter's chill. Arya Stark appeared unexpectedly, disdaining processions and fanfare, choosing instead to slip into the city unnoticed until she announced herself at the Red Keep. Bran the Broken remained in Winterfell, as the three-eyed raven's duties held him fast to the heart of the North. Tyrion Lannister, now Hand of the Queen, though some said he was hand of the king and queen both. Took his place at Daenerys' side, lines of care and wisdom etched deeper into his face. Ser Davos Seaworth arrived alongside them, the Onion Knight still bearing that unwavering sense of moral clarity. Yara Greyjoy, Gendry Baratheon, Brienne of Tarth. Each carried the weight of history. Each had served or resisted the Targaryen cause in their own way. All were uncertain about what the future might hold. In the Great Hall, rebuilt from ashes, the scorched pillars and walls painstakingly restored with a sense of defiance, the lords and ladies gathered to see the royal family. Daenerys wore a gown of silver and black, the Targaryen sigil emblazoned delicately on her shoulder. Jon stood beside her, clad in stark leathers reminiscent of the North, reminding all that his blood carried two heritages. But it was Aemon in Daenerys' arms who truly captured every gaze. Only a handful of months old, he looked upon the crowd with wide violet eyes. There was something uncanny in him, a quiet solemnity that hushed the audience. Even the lesser lords who nursed their grudges paused to witness the child's curious expression. Daenerys spoke not of conquest but of unity. She recalled the long night, the terror they all faced together. She spoke of the tragedies that had scarred the land, her own grief at losing so many loved ones, and the devastation unleashed by war. Then she offered a vow: her dragons would never again be used to burn cities or extort fealty. They would be guardians, protectors of the realm, and she asked only that the lords remember the fleeting nature of peace, that they value it enough to set aside centuries of suspicion. She also declared that her son, Aemon Targaryen, was heir not just to her lineage but to the shared legacy of the North and the South. Though no Iron Throne remained, there was still a seat of authority in King's Landing. She intended for Aemon to inherit more than a monarchy, she wanted him to inherit hope. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sansa Stark, regal in her own right, inclined her head slightly. She had seen too much suffering to believe in easy words. Yet she remembered the White Walkers, the aftermath of the battle for Winterfell, and the crucial role Daenerys' dragons had played. She glanced at Jon, who met her gaze with quiet fortitude. They had once been siblings in name, cousins in blood. Now, they were allies once more, tethered by an unspoken understanding that the realm could not endure endless cycles of vengeance. Sansa slowly lowered herself into a measured curtsy, a gesture of acceptance rather than adulation. Then Yara Greyjoy stood, took a breath, and vowed fealty, reminding them all that she remembered Daenerys' promise for the Iron Islands' freedom under the realm, not severed from it. In one pocket of the hall, Gendry nodded, his Baratheon status freshly legitimized, forging a path for the Stormlands. One by one, lords and ladies demonstrated cautious support. Outside the hall, the dragons stirred. Viserion and Regal circled above the city's ramparts, their shadows crisscrossing over the wide streets. Drogon, the largest of the three, remained farther from King's Landing than usual, roosting on a distant hill that overlooked the city. Rumor whispered that Daenerys and Drogon had a special bond tested by heartbreak, his distance an echo of her own tormented conscience. But the younger dragons, the clutch of new life, were now old enough to cry out for their matriarch's attention. Their squeals echoed across the Red Keep's courtyard, and many in King's Landing still cowered whenever they heard the high-pitched shrieks. Yet none could deny that those squeals also carried an undercurrent of wonder, as if each day the city awakened to a living, breathing myth. Weeks bled into months. Under Tyrion's guidance, new roads were constructed to replace those destroyed. Under Ser Davos's watchful eye, diplomatic envoys ventured to the corners of Westeros, offering olive branches instead of threats. Jon, always torn between the North and his family in King's Landing, traveled frequently to Winterfell. There, he visited Bran to glean the young man's insights. The three-eyed raven had grown more distant, more cryptic, yet he assured Jon and those who asked that he saw no immediate darkness looming, at least not the kind that once brought the dead to life. But the realm had never lacked for challenges, and rumor carried talk of bandits in the Stormlands, secret plots in Dorne, and shadowy visions in the Citadel. Through it all, Daenerys threw herself into governance, wrestling with her guilt, her sense of destiny, and her deep love for her son. As Aemon grew, it became clear he was no ordinary child. Some whispered he inherited the best traits of both parents, Daenerys' fierce spirit and Jon's quiet integrity. Others murmured that his gaze seemed to hold knowledge beyond his years. He had a peculiar effect on the dragons, too. Even the newborn drakes, prone to wildness and curiosity, grew calm in his presence. It was as though they sensed kinship in his Targaryen blood, an unspoken bond that transcended the usual boundaries. Daenerys watched her son place a chubby hand against a hatchling's scaled flank, giggling at the purring rumble that vibrated through the creature's throat. Meanwhile, Jon would linger at the threshold, smiling despite himself, reminded yet again of how extraordinary their lives had become. The smallfolk began to speak of the child of promise. The phrase carried whispers of old prophecies: Azor Ahai reborn, the prince that was promised, but Daenerys and Jon hesitated to indulge in those legends. They had both seen how prophecy could twist men's hearts and shatter them upon the stones of reality. Still, they could not deny Aemon had a certain magnetism. His presence seemed to soothe men's anger, quell arguments before swords could be drawn. Even in infancy, lords found themselves smiling involuntarily when he reached for their fingers, as if forging a bond before they realized it. It was not long before letters arrived, carried by Raven. They spoke of the Stepstones, how pirates infested that chain of isles, extorting ships bearing food and supplies. They spoke of the scattered Golden Company mercenaries, leaderless after the wars, who skulked in Essos, perhaps waiting for a chance to reclaim a foothold. They spoke of petty lords in the Reach, bickering over farmland. Daenerys knew that if any peace were to last, she could not simply remain in King's Landing as threats festered. She rallied the realm to address these problems methodically, urging unity and compromise rather than brute force. When negotiations failed, she would consider sending forces to restore order, but always with caution. The memory of dragonfire consuming city streets weighed heavily upon her, and she swore never to let such terror unfold again. Yet trouble has a way of creeping in unseen. One night, the cry of horns resounded through King's Landing. People rushed from their homes to see a lone figure staggering through the gate, half dead and raving about an enemy from the sea. Soldiers surrounded the battered man, but the words poured from his lips in a delirious torrent. He claimed to have seen monstrous ships near the coast of Dorne, black sails embroidered with a sigil no one recognized. He claimed dark magic twisted the crews, that men rose from watery graves to fight again. The guards dismissed him as a madman at first, but his wounds were real. Deep gashes that reeked of salt and rot marred his flesh. Maesters tended to him, and Daenerys, alerted in the dead of night, rushed to the infirmary with Jon at her side. There she found a trembling wreck of a man with sunken eyes. "They come," he hissed. "They come for your dragons. They come for the Targaryen babe." He collapsed into feverish babble, but not before Daenerys and Jon exchanged a troubled glance. The next day, the man died of his injuries, leaving more questions than answers. Councils were held. Tyrion cautioned that any external threat would be emboldened by internal division. They must show a unified front. Sansa argued that the North could spare men, but she would only do so if Jon's word assured her it was necessary. Yara, fiercely protective of the seas near the Iron Islands, promised to dispatch scouts. Meanwhile, Daenerys felt an ache of foreboding. She wondered if old powers had awakened in the far corners of the world, powers that coveted dragons or resented the Targaryen restoration. Once she had believed dragons would be the instruments of her destiny. Now she feared they might be the lure that drew every new threat to Westeros's doorstep. As the threat loomed, Daenerys and Jon resolved to keep Aemon safe. A plan was devised to send him discreetly to Dragonstone if trouble befell King's Landing. The old fortress, carved from the volcanic rock, had stood as the ancestral seat of House Targaryen for centuries. With its secret tunnels and strategic position, it could be defended more easily than the sprawl of the capital. They trusted that if the worst came, Aemon would be spirited away by those loyal to them, perhaps Davos or Missandei's kin, ensuring he grew up free from the horrors that threatened. For all their resolve, the notion of parting with their son cut Daenerys to the core, and she prayed it would never come to that. In the weeks that followed, scouts reported strange sightings. Fog banks off the coast of Dorne, drifting unnaturally. Ships found run aground with no sign of the crew. Rumors of missing fishermen. No definitive proof of undead or spectral foes appeared. Yet the tension in the air thickened. Daenerys felt echoes of the White Walker threat, the creeping sense of inevitability that once overshadowed the living. Even the dragons sensed her unease. Drogon prowled the skies near King's Landing more often, roaring at the horizon, while Viserion and Rhaegal circled protectively, their eyes scanning the waves. The younger dragons, some already large enough to bear a rider's weight, mimicked the older trio's vigilance, as if preparing for something they didn't fully understand. Then came a messenger from Dorne, a woman who arrived bruised and exhausted, her Dornish garb torn and caked in dust. She brought news. A small coastal village near Sunspear had been raided. The attackers left no survivors, save for a few who managed to flee into the desert. The survivors described wraith-like fighters, men with pale skin and lifeless eyes, surging from galleys under black sails. Their leader bore a sword rumored to glow in the moonlight with an icy sheen. At the mention of that detail, Jon felt his breath catch. Ice and darkness, a horrifying echo of the long night. Daenerys swallowed a surge of panic. They had faced the army of the dead and prevailed, or so they believed. Could something akin to that horror still linger? Councils turned into strategy sessions. They weighed the possibility that these pirates or raiders might be using illusions, capitalizing on the realm's fear of the undead to sow chaos. Regardless, the threat was real enough to warrant a response. Yara would lead a fleet south to cut off maritime incursions. The Dornish lords, roused from their customary autonomy, agreed to fortify their coasts. Daenerys herself considered flying down on Drogon to assess the threat. Jon insisted on accompanying her, either on Rhaegal's back or by ship. Their arguments about safety were swift but loaded with care. In the end, Daenerys yielded, remembering how she'd nearly lost everything by venturing north to rescue White Proof in a past life. She would not repeat such reckless leaps into danger. Still, a show of strength was needed. Daenerys decided she would take Rhaegal, while Jon stayed behind with Aemon to ensure King's Landing remained secure. She intended a quick survey of Dorne's coast, nothing more. If the threat was too great, she would return and bring the full might of the dragons. She kissed her son on the brow, whispered a soft goodbye to Jon, and mounted Rhaegal in the courtyard of the Red Keep. The young dragons screeched, wanting to follow, but she urged them to remain. They were still untested in battle, and she would not risk them needlessly. Rhaegal's powerful wings churned the air, lifting Daenerys skyward. The city shrank beneath her, the labyrinth of streets and alleys falling away as she soared southward. The crisp wind bit at her cheeks, and the scale ridges along Rhaegal's neck pressed firmly against her legs. Despite the unease in her heart, she felt a thrill of freedom. She had always felt more herself in the sky. The flight to Dorne was swift, and at dusk she circled above Sunspear. She saw the lights of the castle torches, the glimmer of evening fires from the town below. Word of her arrival spread quickly, and a welcoming party, among them the Prince of Dorne, greeted her at the courtyard. She did not linger for ceremony, but instead demanded to see what remained of the raided villages. By the following morning, they rowed out. Along Dorne's coastline, she saw wreckage, homes burned, small boats shattered upon the shore, bodies left in shallow graves. At each site, the same black residue stained the sand, a foul substance with an odor of decay. Tracks indicated large parties had moved inland. She asked the Dornish scouts if they had found any living raiders, but each time the response was negative. It was as though the attackers vanished after each assault, leaving only fear in their wake. Daenerys' mind raced with possibilities. Necromancers? Some twisted sorcery from across the sea? She knew Essos held shadowbinders from Ass High, practitioners of blood magic in Volantis, warlocks from Karth. Could one of them have harnessed a new brand of undead creation? When she and her escort came upon a child survivor hidden in the wreckage of a fishing hut, Daenerys felt her heart seize. A young boy, no older than 5, stared at her with hollow, tearless eyes. The Dornish guards gently coaxed him to speak. In a trembling voice, he described pale warriors with eyes like polished bone. Their leader wore a helm shaped like a twisted crown of coral, and he brandished a sword that hissed like frost. Daenerys shivered. The details echoed the terror of the Night King, yet felt altogether different. She thanked the boy and ordered he be cared for. She lingered in Dorne for a fortnight, investigating each attack, conferring with the Prince of Dorne, dispatching riders to track the raiders. Rhaegal circled overhead, scanning the coasts, but the mysterious assailants seemed to have withdrawn or perhaps moved elsewhere. Refeeling a gnawing dread, Daenerys resolved to return to King's Landing. She needed the counsel of Jon and Tyrion and perhaps the clarity of Bran's gaze. If a new threat resembling the undead had truly emerged, the realm would have to unite again, more fiercely than before. Upon her return to King's Landing, she found the city abuzz with anxiety. Another rumor had spread like wildfire. Baby dragons, dozens more, had begun to hatch in the catacombs beneath the Red Keep. The keepers could hardly contain them. Jon met Daenerys at the courtyard gates, Aemon in his arms. He had a look of both wonder and worry. As she dismounted Rhaegal, he recounted how, one by one, eggs believed to be mere stone had begun to crack. Small, squalling hatchlings emerged, some midnight black, others a shimmering jade, others a ghostly white. The older brood hissed and tried to corral them as though performing some instinctive maternal duty. Yet the hatchlings kept coming, unstoppable in their arrival, a storm of scales and wings. Daenerys exchanged a stunned glance with Jon. They had already welcomed a new generation, but this was beyond anything she'd imagined. Maesters were baffled, suspecting that the presence of so many dragons had somehow stirred dormant eggs. Others spoke of old Targaryen lore, how dragons flourished in times of powerful magic. With each new hatchling came new challenges, housing them, feeding them, ensuring they did not turn predatory on the city that had once feared dragonfire. Yet Daenerys also felt an undercurrent of hope. Dragons had always been the heart of her lineage. Their resurgence felt like a sign, though of what she could not say. That evening, Daenerys cradled Aemon close, watching him reach out curiously toward a newly hatched dragon no bigger than a large cat. The creature chirped, sniffed at the babe's hand, and then folded its wings as though in submission. Jon knelt by their side, an odd grin tugging at his lips. In that moment, the gloom of undead raiders and ominous sightings receded. All that mattered was the fragile unity of their family and the possibilities stirring in the world. Yet threats did not vanish. Reports came from Yara's fleet. She had found suspicious vessels off the stepstones, ships with black sails, bearing a strange sigil that looked like intertwined serpents. She engaged them in a skirmish. Her men reported that the enemy fought with a fanaticism bordering on madness. Wounds that should have killed them did not stop them until they were hacked apart or set ablaze. A handful of Yara's warriors swore the raiders' eyes shone with an eerie luminescence. Though Yara managed to capture one of the enemy's officers, the man died before revealing anything. His body crumbled into some unrecognizable dark sludge, dissolving even the bone. Once the fighting was done, Yara burned the remains of the fallen, friend and foe alike, and returned to Deepwood Motte to recoup. Her letters indicated she believed this was no ordinary warband. Fears of a second long night loomed over the realm. Sansa journeyed south, wanting to see for herself what transpired. Arya, never one to stand idle, dispatched her own spies, rumored to be a network of orphans and urchins she trusted. Tyrion's nights were consumed by reading ancient tomes, anything that might hint at a threat from the sea. Ser Davos, old enough to recall Stannis Baratheon's ill-fated campaigns, contributed his naval insights, insisting that if an undead-like force came by water, the realm must unify its fleets and its dragons to stand a chance. Amid the escalating tensions, Aemon took his first steps. He toddled across the polished floor of the Red Keep's throne room, giggling as he reached for Daenerys' outstretched hands. A hush fell over the assembled courtiers, knights, lords, ladies, and servants all paused to watch the little prince. In that fleeting moment, the worries of the realm receded, replaced by smiles. Sansa knelt down to encourage him, her expression softening with genuine affection. Gendry Baratheon, forging a new identity as Lord of Storm's End, clapped lightly while Tyrion observed the scene with a weary but affectionate smile. Soon after, Daenerys convened a council of war in that same throne room under the watchful eyes of so many curious baby dragons perched along the gallery railings. They had grown bold enough to venture out of the catacombs, though most still heeded the calls of the older dragons. Daenerys stood at the head of a long table, her silver hair braided in the Targaryen style, eyes shining with determination. Jon stood at her right, solemn as ever, and Tyrion to her left, wearing a thoughtful frown. The major lords of Westeros were present or had sent envoys. They devised a strategy. The realm would send a joint force to the Stepstones, led by Yara's Ironborn and supported by the royal dragons. Their mission, to locate the black-sailed fleet's stronghold and destroy it before it could unleash further terror. Simultaneously, scouts would patrol the coasts, ready to light signal fires at any sign of more raids. The bulk of the new dragons, still young, would remain in the capital, too inexperienced for battle. But the older ones, Drogon, Rhaegal, Viserion, along with a handful of the sturdiest adolescent drakes, would join the expedition. Jon volunteered to lead the draconic assault, but Daenerys insisted they go together. She refused to watch from afar while her people took such risks. Sansa, mindful of the line of succession, implored them to consider leaving Aemon behind in King's Landing or at Dragonstone for safety. After a tense debate, Daenerys agreed that Aemon would remain in the capital under the guardianship of those she trusted most, Sansa, Tyrion, and Ser Davos, until the threat was contained. The day of departure was bittersweet. Daenerys and Jon both lingered in the nursery, holding Aemon tight, hearts heavy with the knowledge that war awaited them. The child reached for Daenerys' braid, tugging gently. She kissed his forehead, murmuring words of love and promises to return. Jon pressed his lips to the boy's temple, then handed him to Sansa, who cradled him with an uncharacteristic softness. As Daenerys and Jon turned to leave, they heard Aemon's small cry, and it took every ounce of will not to turn back. They knew what was at stake. If the realm fell to these new terrors, Aemon would inherit only a land of ashes and fear. Their combined forces sailed for the Stepstones, the royal flagship cutting through gray waves, its sails bearing the Targaryen sigil alongside the direwolf of the north. A symbol of the union between ice and fire, the Iron Fleet stretched around them, a formidable armada under Yara's fierce command. Flying above, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion led a squadron of younger dragons, each adorned with light, protective chest pieces hammered out by Gendry's blacksmiths. The sight was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Never in recent memory had Westeros seen so many dragons in one place. The journey was fraught with storms. It seemed as though the sea itself rebelled against them, tossing waves high enough to slam against the hulls. More than once, Daenerys considered taking flight to avoid the onslaught, but she stayed with her men, enduring the tempest as they did. Rain lashed the decks, lightning streaked across the sky, and the dragons roared in defiance of the howling winds. At night, strange flickers of light appeared on the horizon, dancing like ghostly lanterns, an ill omen or simply illusions born of fatigue. Finally, they sighted the Stepstones, a cluster of jagged isles, notorious for their shifting channels and hidden reefs, home to pirates and smugglers for generations. Yara's men navigated carefully, eyes scanning the water for signs of ambush. The dragons flew low, black silhouettes against a turbulent sky. Then, on the far side of a towering rock formation, they spotted it. A small fleet anchored in a sheltered cove, sails black as a starless night, carved figureheads depicting monstrous sea serpents. Scouts reported that a makeshift fortress of wood and stone had been built on the largest isle. Tension hummed. Daenerys stood on the deck, rain-soaked hair clinging to her face. Jon was beside her, sword at his hip, cloak whipping in the wind. They exchanged a silent look, recalling the many battles they had fought. Against the dead, against Cersei, against all those who sought to crush hope. This new enemy might be just as dire, but they had come prepared, bearing the fire of dragons and the unity of houses. Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's back, Jon onto Rhaegal, and with roars that split the air, they took flight. What followed was a clash that shook the skies. The enemy fleet responded with strange projectiles, spiked harpoons tipped with dark crystals that shimmered with unnatural energy. Those black spears seemed to sap the vitality of whatever they struck, leaving wooden hulls rotting from within or scorching dragon scales within a hiss. The dragons retaliated with furious gouts of flame, turning enemy ships into raging pyres. Yara's Ironborn flanked the black-sailed vessels, hurling grappling hooks and boarding them with bloody ferocity. The younger dragons, under Viserion's and Rhaegal's guidance, strafed the fortress walls, belching fire that reduced wooden palisades to ash. Daenerys circled overhead, scanning for the source of this dark sorcery. She saw figures in black cloaks scuttling along the parapets, carrying orbs that glowed with an eerie luminescence. Each time a dragon swooped near, the figures raised the orbs, sending arcs of darkness that crackled against the dragon's scales. Drogon bellowed in rage. She felt his pain through their bond, a tearing ache that reverberated in her bones. Desperate, Daenerys urged Drogon to unleash his might, a torrent of flame that overwhelmed the ramparts, incinerating the figures. The orbs shattered, releasing shrieks that sounded almost human. Below, Jon dismounted Rhaegal to lead a ground assault, forging through the smoldering remains of the fortress gates. Sword in hand, he cut down foes whose eyes glowed with that eerie light as though possessed by a force not entirely their own. Yara's Ironborn joined the fray, cleaving through the enemy lines. Yet the raiders fought with unsettling tenacity. Severed limbs didn't always fell them, and black ichor seeped from their wounds. One lunged at Jon even after losing half its torso, grasping at his leg with rotted fingers. Jon gritted his teeth, drove long claw through its skull, only to see it continue to thrash until finally the black sludge dissolved whatever was left. Drogon's roaring flame and the pounding of waves created a deafening symphony of chaos. At last, the fortress interior was breached. Daenerys landed Drogon in the courtyard, taking stock of the carnage. Burned bodies, splintered wood, collapsed stone. She hopped down, ignoring the sting of her own bruises, searching for Jon among the smoke and embers. She spotted him kneeling near a fallen figure. Rhaegal hovered behind him, growling low. As Daenerys approached, she saw the figure wore a twisted crown of coral just as the Dornish boy had described. But the crown was cracked and the figure's chest was riven open. Black sludge seeped from the wound, forming a fractal pattern in the ground. With a final, rattling gasp, the crowned figure seemed to whisper, though no words emerged. Then the body collapsed into an oily pool that sizzled against the stone. Jon met Daenerys' gaze. Exhaustion lined his face, but relief and resolve still burned in his eyes. "It's done," he said, the words trembling with caution. He glanced around, taking in the black-sailed ships now ablaze, the fortress walls collapsing in flames. For now. In the aftermath, they investigated every corner of the stronghold. They found altars carved with serpentine motifs and runes that neither Tyrion nor any maester could decipher. They found decaying bodies of men who appeared to have been thralls, possibly from Essos. It seemed a cult of some sort had harnessed a dark power to animate the dead or nearly dead, forging an army to scour the seas. But with the destruction of this stronghold, the threat was contained, at least temporarily. Daenerys gazed out at the smoldering fleet, thinking of how easily darkness could seep into the realm, given the right opportunity. They returned to King's Landing weary but triumphant. Crowds gathered to cheer them, relief washing over the city like a cleansing wave. Even so, Daenerys sensed an undercurrent of unease. The mysteries of that cult, the runes, the orbs, they hinted at forces that might yet linger. But for now, they had secured peace. The next morning, Daenerys and Jon reunited with Aemon. The child squealed in delight, flailing tiny arms until Daenerys scooped him up. She held him close, tears of relief stinging her eyes. Jon wrapped an arm around them both. This was what they fought for, not just a throne or a crown, but the chance for their son and all children to inherit a world free from the nightmares of the past. Peace settled over the realm for a time. The Stepstone's threat receded and Yara maintained a vigilant watch. Sansa returned to Winterfell, satisfied that unity was possible but ever the realist, aware how fragile such unity could be. Tyrion continued to guide economic recovery, forging new alliances with the free cities, ensuring trade routes were open and protected. The baby dragons grew rapidly, a tapestry of shimmering colors patrolling the skies around King's Landing. The small folk began to adapt to the presence of so many dragons, forging a wary but wondrous coexistence. As each month passed, Aemon also grew, his once uncertain steps becoming a confident toddle, his babyish gurgles turning into early words. He took to the dragons with an innate curiosity. Often, Daenerys would find him in the courtyard, petting a hatchling's head, mumbling nonsense words that made the young drake tilt its head in confusion. She would scoop him up, smiling, marveling at how her life had shifted from a lonely quest for power to a full heart dedicated to her family, her people, her dragons. Meanwhile, Jon spent long days in council, ensuring that every region's grievances were addressed. He had grown more comfortable in his Targaryen heritage, though some in the north still called him Snow in private. He bore the slights with patience, confident that time would prove the sincerity of his intentions. Within a year, the prosperity of this new era began to manifest. Fields in the Reach flourished, trade with Dorne stabilized, and the north rebuilt roads ravaged by war. Stories spread of a Targaryen child who pet dragons as though they were kittens, a living bridge between two once hostile legacies. And though Daenerys still bore scars from the war, literal and metaphorical, she found solace in each step forward that Westeros took. Yet, as always, the seeds of conflict needed only the faintest wind to stir them. Ambitious lords cast envious eyes on the draconic power concentrated in King's Landing. Merchants whispered that Daenerys and Jon hoarded wealth gained from trade taxes. Some older families of Valyrian descent claimed they had a better right to guide the dragons. And further afield, in the ashes of Essos's once great cities, warlords and would-be conquerors eyed Westeros's resurgence. The cycle of power never truly ended, it only shifted, changed shape. Daenerys refused to shy away from these challenges. She and Jon toured the realm, bringing Aemon with them, introducing him to each region's lords and small folk. In the north, they stood in Winterfell's Great Hall, where many remembered Jon's upbringing and Daenerys's unwavering support in the fight against the White Walkers. They walked through the crypts, paying respects to the Starks who lay at rest, forging a deeper bond with Sansa, who had grown to trust Daenerys in her own quiet, guarded way. In the Vale, they soared over the Eyrie with two dragons, the high spires trembling in the gust of wings. In the Riverlands, they saw farmland reclaimed from ruin, families returning to homesteads once burned by bandits. Everywhere they went, They demonstrated that House Targaryen would not rule through fear alone. As Aemon reached his third name day, the realm celebrated with a grand tourney, less a show of martial might than a festival of unity. Knights jousted in shining armor, their horses decked in the colors of houses that had once been at each other's throats. Archers displayed feats of precision, while the crowd cheered merrily. Dragons circled overhead, not as instruments of destruction but as awe-inspiring guardians, occasionally belching celebratory bursts of flame into the sky. In a special enclosure built for the smaller dragons, children ran forward to feed them bits of meat under the watchful eye of keepers. The laughter of the small folk intermingled with the dragons' purrs. Daenerys and Jon presided over the tourney side by side, their thrones simple but regal, carved from wood and draped in banners of Targaryen black and red, alongside Stark gray and white. Aemon sat on Daenerys' lap, wide-eyed at the spectacle of the justs. When a pair of knights tilted at each other, Aemon clapped his little hands, delight lighting up his face. The crowd roared with approval, not for the violence, but for the symbol of a new generation bridging the gap between old rivalries. But late that night, as the festivities waned and the revelers slept in tents scattered around the fields outside King's Landing, Daenerys gazed into the dying embers of a hearth and felt a deep stir of unease. She thought of the battle at the stepstones. She thought of the shadowy orbs that crackled with dark energy, the runes carved into stone altars. She recalled the crowned figure with the coral diadem and the black sludge that had dissolved into nothing. For all their victories, for all this hard-won peace, she knew the world was vast and brimming with ancient sorceries and hidden foes. She vowed then that she would never let her guard down, that she would remain vigilant for any sign of threat to her son, her dragons, her realm. In the morning light, the worries that haunted her seemed to fade, overshadowed by the joyous aftermath of the tourney. Children chased each other with wooden swords, adults sang bawdy songs, and lords and ladies convened to discuss alliances forged in good spirits. Daenerys, Jon, and Aemon greeted the crowd on a raised platform, awarding prizes to the winners of the joust and archery competitions. When the champion knight knelt and accepted his trophy, an exquisite blade forged by Gendry, he pledged his loyalty to House Targaryen and to the unity of Westeros. A chorus of cheers erupted, and as Daenerys lifted Aemon high for all to see, a rainbow of dragon wings soared behind them. Over time, the new generation of dragons began to scatter across the continent, though never too far from the call of the older three. Some soared to the Reach, hunting in the lush forests. Others explored the craggy mountains of the Vale. People told tales of glimpses at dusk, the silhouette of a young dragon perched on a cliff overlooking a village, shimmering eyes observing the world below. Yet no stories came of dragons attacking innocents or burning fields indiscriminately. Guided by Daenerys' bond and by the presence of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, they seemed more aloof guardians than mindless beasts. When Aemon turned 5, he stood in the courtyard of the Red Keep, gazing up at Drogon with an expression of awe devoid of fear. Daenerys and Jon watched, hearts swelling with pride and a tinge of trepidation. The boy reached up a small hand, the morning sun catching. The silver tangle of his hair. Drogon lowered his massive head, nostrils flaring as he inhaled the child's scent. A low rumble vibrated through the courtyard, the air itself humming with ancient power. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, with a gentleness that belied his immense size, Drogon nudged the boy's outstretched hand, allowing him to rest his palm against the dragon's warm, scaled snout. Laughter bubbled out of Aemon, bright and free, and Drogon let out a long, soft growl as though returning the greeting. Jon exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Daenerys' eyes glistened, her heart full, remembering how Drogon once seemed an extension of her own soul. Now, it was as if he recognized the continuation of their legacy in Aemon. All the heartbreak, the wars, the struggles to find a better path. It crystallized in that single moment of kinship between a young prince and the mightiest dragon alive. Yet beyond the walls of King's Landing, men still plotted. In the shadows of taverns, discontented lords schemed, whispering that the Targaryen line was growing too strong, that the new generation of dragons would shift the balance of power irreversibly. In distant lands, magisters who once profited from chaos eyed the realm's stability with envy. And in dark corners, practitioners of forbidden arts speculated how they might harness draconic blood or seize control of hatchlings. The realm was calmer than before, But peace in Westeros was never permanent. By the time Aemon was 8, he had begun lessons with maesters, learning the history of the Seven Kingdoms, the tragedies that befell House Targaryen, and the heroic deeds of House Stark. He showed an unusual aptitude for strategy, often surprising Ser Davos and Tyrion by grasping the intricacies of alliances. He wasn't a perfect child. He had a mischievous streak that surfaced whenever he could slip away to the dragon pens unobserved. But for all his precocious intelligence, he remained unassuming, more interested in exploring secret passages of the Red Keep or feeding scraps of meat to hatchlings than in wearing a crown. Meanwhile, Daenerys and Jon nurtured him with both love and discipline. They taught him empathy, drawing on Jon's experiences among the free folk and Daenerys's experiences freeing the enslaved in Essos. They instilled in him the importance of justice, the dangers of unchecked power. They told him of the long night, so he would remember how close the realm came to utter doom. They reminded him that to rule was to serve, and that the dragons were guardians, not monsters to be unleashed. They also made sure he understood that the realm was larger than any single person. Forging alliances was not a sign of weakness, but a strength. Yet, as Aemon grew, so too did the dragons. The second generation, once small enough to perch on a child's shoulder, now spanned wings of 20 feet or more. Some had personalities as varied as the great houses. Fierce and proud, shy and playful, cunning and independent. But all answered when needed to Daenerys' call. She had become the living symbol of a dragon lord, a queen who proved her compassion even as she wielded draconic power. With the presence of so many dragons, the realm's conflicts diminished. Few dared to make open war, knowing the cost. Tyrion once noted, in a rare moment of levity, it's remarkable how cordial people can become when the skies are patrolled by flying lizards capable of turning them to ash. His wry smile underscored a truth that gnawed at Daenerys: was peace only assured through the fear of dragons? Jon reassured her that hearts had changed, not just manners. He pointed to the harvest festivals, the treaties signed, the reduction in banditry. Perhaps fear played a role, but hope had its part as well. The Targaryen monarchy had begun to repair the wounds of the past, offering stability where once chaos reigned. On a crisp winter's morning, word reached the Red Keep that a child had been born in the Westerlands, rumored to have hair the color of spun gold and eyes like emeralds. Another rumor said the child had some distant Lannister lineage. Superstitious tongues wagged that he might grow to become the next conqueror of something or another, that he carried ambition in his blood. Daenerys merely smiled at such talk, remembering how many times she had been subjected to the weight of prophecy and expectation. Children were not tools of fate, she believed; they shaped their own destinies. Still, she sent a small gift to the child's parents, a set of blankets embroidered with the Targaryen sigil, a gesture of goodwill from the crown. As another year passed and Aemon approached his 9th name day, Daenerys realized she could no longer avoid teaching him certain truths about her past. She could see his curiosity spark whenever talk of the old wars arose. He had heard whispered tales of dragonfire in King's Landing, of how Daenerys once burned the city. Though those tales were half-truths, the notion weighed heavily on his young mind. Daenerys sat him down in her private solar, the windows letting in a subdued light. She told him of her mistakes, of how grief and rage clouded her judgment, how she had let the thirst for power and the sting of betrayal guide her. Jon, standing at her side, recounted his own struggles, how he had loved her, yet also feared what might happen if the realm could not find balance. They spoke of the mistakes that cost so many lives and the steps they took afterward to atone. Aemon's eyes glistened with tears. He threw his arms around Daenerys, holding tight as though sensing the pain that lingered beneath her calm demeanor. "Never forget," she whispered to him, "that power without compassion is the surest way to destroy yourself." He nodded, solemn beyond his years. One evening, a raven arrived from Old Town. The Archmaester had discovered a set of ancient scrolls referencing a prophecy about the child of two flames who would unite the realm of men with beasts of sky. Tyrion, ever the cynic when it came to prophecies, rolled his eyes, but Ser Davos read the scrolls with earnest fascination. Daenerys felt a stab of anxiety. She feared any prophecy that might set impossible expectations on Aemon. Jon folded the parchment away, remarking that if prophecy meant anything, it only meant their choices mattered more than ever. They would forge their path through action, not fate. The next day, they walked with Aemon along the city's outer walls. From that vantage, the sprawl of King's Landing looked almost serene, the chaos of the past replaced by the bustle of commerce and daily life. Dragons soared overhead, casting fleeting shadows on the cobblestones below. Jon placed a hand on Aemon's shoulder, pointing out the harbor where ships from Dorne, the Reach, the Iron Islands, and even Braavos traded goods. Daenerys stood tall, wind rippling through her cloak, her gaze scanning the horizon. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of Dragonstone, a reminder of their roots. She felt a calm settle over her, a sense that for all the challenges ahead they had made a difference. Aemon asked if he could see where the new eggs were kept, the ones that might hatch in the coming months. Daenerys nodded, smiling as he dashed off with childlike excitement, escorted by a pair of guards and a wizened old dragon keeper. Jon laughed softly, watching him go. "He has your spirit," he said, turning to Daenerys. "A relentless curiosity for dragons and the world itself." Daenerys leaned into Jon's side, letting out a contented sigh. "I hope he never loses that wonder," she replied. "The world needs leaders who still see magic in it rather than treating it as just a resource to exploit." Jon pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. For a fleeting moment, they were free of titles, just two people who had braved countless sorrows to arrive at a place of love and understanding. Watching the dragons wheel overhead, they allowed themselves a rare moment of peace, hearts beating in a unified rhythm, the swirl of old regrets and future uncertainties fading before the brilliance of the present. Within the year that followed, Aemon continued to grow in both stature and spirit. He began to ride the youngest of the mature dragons under careful supervision. The first time he felt the rush of wind beneath draconic wings, he let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the city. Daenerys and Jon felt a jumble of pride and parental terror, but they knew this was his birthright. He was the child of House Targaryen and House Stark, destined to bridge divides they could only imagine. On a morning lit by a fiery sunrise, Daenerys stood in the courtyard, watching Aemon soar gently on the back of a green-scaled drake with obsidian-colored horns. The boy guided the dragon with surprising steadiness, swooping low over the castle walls, earning cheers from soldiers and stable boys. Daenerys' heart swelled. She thought of how once she had been the lone mother of dragons. Now she stood in a realm that embraced the draconic legacy, a new generation forging bonds that could reshape history. Jon appeared at her side, wearing a faint smile. "He'll outfly us all soon enough," he said, half-joking. Daenerys shook her head in wry amusement. "We'll see about that," she replied, glancing at Drogon, who was curled on the ramparts, watching the display with an almost paternal gaze. A light breeze carried the scent of the sea from Blackwater Bay, mingling with the city's myriad aromas: baking bread, salted fish, incense from a nearby sept. Tyrion approached, clearing his throat. "Your Graces," he began with that formal tone he often used when the matter was serious. "The envoy from Volantis has arrived. They request an audience regarding trade rights and potential assistance with some magical anomalies they've encountered." Daenerys raised an eyebrow. "Magical anomalies?" Tyrion nodded, an edge of concern in his voice. "Yes, it seems our old friend the Red Priestess, Melisandre's order, has been stirring up new devotions among the people. They claim to see signs of dire omens. The envoy wishes to discuss alliances. Possibly they want protection from any new darkness that might arise." Jon and Daenerys exchanged a knowing look. Once, such talk of omens and darkness would have made them laugh or tremble. Now, they simply accepted it as part of the ever-shifting tapestry of their world. Dragons soared again, magic pulsed in hidden corners, and the fate of the living always hung in delicate balance. "Schedule the audience," Daenerys said softly, turning to Jon. "It seems our work is never done." Jon shrugged, a small smile quirking his lips. "Would you expect anything less?" Daenerys paused to watch Aemon land the dragon in a graceful glide, the boy leaping off with triumphant glee. He spotted his parents, waved excitedly, and sprinted toward them, cheeks flushed with exhilaration. Daenerys stooped to catch him in her arms, spinning him around. His laughter was a burst of sunlight in the courtyard. In that laugh, Daenerys heard the echo of a promise that the horrors of yesterday need not define tomorrow. Together, she and Jon had brought forth a child who represented unity, had shepherded a legion of dragons who could protect rather than destroy, and had worked tirelessly to heal a realm fractured by centuries of conflict. Countless trials lay ahead: human ambition, sorcerous threats, the slow churn of political unrest. But so long as they stood together, guided by love, compassion, and the unwavering determination to ensure that the sins of the past were not repeated, they believed the realm would endure. Thus it was, in the 10th year of Daenerys' reign, with Jon Snow, or Aegon Targaryen as some persisted in naming him, by her side, that Westeros found itself unified in a manner unknown for generations. The child of ice and fire walked hand in hand with the mother of dragons, while dozens of scaled creatures soared in the skies above, harbingers of a new era. And in the heart of it all, young Aemon Targaryen, with wide violet eyes and the fearless spirit of a Stark, carried forward the hope that the realm, scarred, battered, but still brimming with life, might yet flourish under the wings of dragons and the warmth of a family determined to break the cycle of bloodshed. Peace and prosperity, precarious though they might be, had come to the Seven Kingdoms at last. And on a balcony overlooking the city of King's Landing, Daenerys Targaryen held her son close, gazing at a sunrise that seemed to burn away every regret, every shadow. She breathed in the cool morning air, feeling Jon's hand rest lightly on her shoulder. The future stretched out before them, uncertain, bound to be fraught with trials and heartbreak, yet also alive with promise. It was more than Daenerys had ever dared hope for in her darkest hours. And if tomorrow brought new challenges, new terrors lurking in the corners of the earth, she had faith they would face them as they always had, together, unbowed, carrying the flame of life against the encroaching darkness. They were, after all, the blood of the dragon. And as any who looked to the sky could see, dragons were very much alive in Westeros. The day broke in a tapestry of lavender clouds and pale light, a hush across King's Landing that made it feel almost new-built, untouched by war, heartbreak, or ambition. Daenerys Targaryen stood on a balcony of the Red Keep, letting the dawn's first warmth brush her cheeks. Below her stretched the city, no longer sooty with fear or bristling with resentment. 10 years had passed since her coronation and the forging of her unexpected alliance with the North, a decade in which the realm had grown more peaceful, united under the symbol of a house once hated and feared. Yet Daenerys knew that peace was never guaranteed, and time had only sharpened her sense that danger could rise without warning, like a leviathan from murky depths. She gazed at the braided sails along the harbor where foreign ships were anchored, representing traders from Bravos, Pentos, and Volantis alike. It was the sign of a thriving capital, of open markets and bulging coffers. The city was safe, prosperous. But she could not dismiss the memory of a recent raven from Old Town describing incidents of magical strangeness in the east, ill omens and portents of a shadow that seemed to stretch across the sea. She recalled the orbs from the stepstones and the black-sailed ships that had once carried dark sorcery, and she wondered if something akin to that threat had only been sleeping. Footsteps padded behind her. Jon approached, dressed in a simple tunic and cloak, looking more every day like the leader the realm needed rather than the reluctant warrior he once was. His hair was shot with a few strands of silver, though he was still young. The Targaryen blood within him manifested in subtle ways. He gave Daenerys a measured glance before turning to watch the sunrise with her. She felt the press of his hand at her waist, a comforting presence that still felt both intimately familiar and quietly miraculous. After everything, they had managed to remain together, forging a stable rule instead of tearing each other apart over blood and lineage. "Aemon's awake early," Jon said. "He's pestering the dragon keepers to let him fly again. He says the wind is perfect for a morning ride." She smiled at that, though it was tinged with maternal caution. "He's had more flight time on that green drake of his than I had in my first year with Drogon. One day he'll ride the older ones, and the gods know if I can manage my worry then." Jon glanced at her in gentle amusement. "He's nearly 10, Dany. When I was 10, I was running around Winterfell's courtyard with a wooden sword, convinced I'd defend the North from all comers. He's braver than I ever was. And with how quickly dragons bond, especially to Targaryen blood," she tilted her head toward him, "he's also more reckless. And we only have so many keepers who can coax the younger dragons if something goes amiss." She paused, exhaling. "I'm proud of him, of how well he's taken to the responsibilities we've placed on his shoulders. Sometimes I look at him and see the future of this realm more clearly than ever. Other times, I'm terrified that we've introduced him too soon to every danger that lurks." Jon nodded. "It's our way, though, isn't it? We can't shield him from the world. Not when he's half Targaryen, half Stark, and a symbol to everyone around us. He's going to inherit the burdens, just as we did." Then Jon's voice softened. "But we'll stand beside him until he can bear them alone." She rested her head on Jon's shoulder for a moment, letting the words sink into her heart. In truth, she had always imagined a different life for any child she'd have. Perhaps one of freedom, unhampered by the quest for power that had shaped her own youth. Yet Aemon was shaped by two great legacies, and with that came obligations. The realm admired him, even as rumors of prophecy circled like lazy vultures in the air. and Daenerys often found herself trying to keep those rumors at bay so that her son could simply live. A sharp call rang out from the courtyard below. A teenage boy's voice, bright with excitement. Daenerys leaned over the balcony's edge to see Aemon standing near a mossy patch of cobblestones, beckoning to a mid-sized dragon perched on a carved statue. The creature's scales shimmered emerald in the rising sun, a wedge-shaped head cocked in attention. When it recognized Aemon's call, it let out a thrum and spread its wings. A few of the keepers hovered nearby, prepared to intervene if needed, but they were all well aware that this particular dragon, named Greenfire by Aemon, had bonded closely with the boy. Aemon glanced up, spotted his parents on the balcony, and lifted his hand in a big wave. He shouted something they couldn't quite make out, but Daenerys heard the thrill in his tone. She called back, "Be careful," then watched as he hopped nimbly onto Greenfire's back. The keepers offered only the most cursory assistance. He'd done this dozens of times, though Daenerys' heart still constricted at the sight of her child climbing a living, fire-breathing beast. With an exuberant cry, Greenfire launched itself skyward, flapping in vigorous bursts that churned the air. Aemon clung expertly to the harness, leaning into each sweep of wings as if he'd been born to ride. Daenerys noted how the morning sun lit her son's hair, revealing the platinum glimmers that marked his Targaryen blood. She felt Jon's hand slip into hers. Wordlessly, they watched as Greenfire climbed higher, a swirl of emerald around the spires. Then the dragon banked and soared off toward the training grounds near the city's edge. Daenerys exhaled slowly, forcing herself to relax. "Shall we go meet the envoy from Volantis?" Jon asked, turning back toward the Red Keep's inner corridors. Daenerys nodded. "Yes. If they've come all this way to speak of magical anomalies, we can't very well leave them waiting." She glanced once more at the sky where Aemon had vanished into the clouds, then forced her mind onto the duty at hand. They walked side by side through the corridors, passing guards who wore the Targaryen sigil alongside the Stark dire wolf and courtiers who stepped back to bow. Daenerys saw in every face a sense of calm, gratitude even, that the capital was no longer a place of terror and sporadic violence. She remembered the day the bells tolled. The memories never left her, but she hoped each new day helped lay old ghosts to rest. In the throne room, its walls painstakingly rebuilt and adorned with frescoes depicting dragons in flight, Tyrion Lannister stood weighty, with his customary half-smile, looking both tired and amused. Time had streaked a bit of gray at his temples, but he remained Hand of the Queen and King, as some said, and her wisest counselor. Next to him stood Ser Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, whose practicality and moral compass Daenerys had come to rely upon more than she ever anticipated in her earlier years. The Volantene envoy was a tall woman dressed in shimmering red robes that evoked the temple of the Lord of Light. Gold filigree lined her sleeves, and around her neck hung a pendant carved with ancient symbols. She inclined her head respectfully as Daenerys and Jon entered, but did not kneel, a courtesy typically reserved for outsiders from Essos who did not fully bow to Westerosi traditions. Daenerys recognized the nuance and allowed it. She was no longer the conqueror demanding slavish devotion. She was a monarch secure in her seat and open to alliances. "Your Graces," the envoy said, her voice melodic. "I bring greetings from the Triarchs of Volantis and from the High Priest of the Red Temple. They regret they could not come themselves, but pressing matters in the city demanded their presence. I am called Felina Vassar, and I have been authorized to speak on their behalf." Jon inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Welcome to King's Landing, Felina Vassar. We understand you wish to discuss trade and something of a more unusual nature." She clasped her hands. "Trade, yes. The Triarchs seek to solidify the shipping lanes between Volantis and King's Landing, as well as request that certain taxes on goods be reconsidered. But the matter of greatest urgency involves a series of disturbances magical in nature, or so it appears, that have begun manifesting along the banks of the Rhoyne and even within the lower wards of Volantis itself. We suspect it may be connected to the spread of worship surrounding the Lord of Light, as well as the resurgence of draconic power in Westeros. There are portents in our city, and we fear some dark force might be using the awakening of magic to slip back into the world." Daenerys did not miss the tension in Felina's voice. She had lived alongside the presence of dragons long enough to sense that the creature's existence often stirred dormant energies that could attract the best and worst of humankind. "We faced something similar not long ago," she said carefully. "At the Stepstones, we encountered a dark sorcery that animated men beyond death and threatened our shores. We do not take such rumors lightly." "Nor should you, Your Grace," Felina replied, her eyes flicking between Jon and Daenerys with something akin to reverence. The Red Priests in Volantis, some of them are claiming that a second long night approaches, that a new terror seeks to claim the flames themselves. Yet others within the temple believe this is but a local cult harnessing twisted magic. The city is divided. The Triarchs, ever practical, want this resolved before it disrupts trade or sows panic. They also fear that because your dragons are a living symbol of fire and might, any dark power that threatens them might, in turn, threaten Volantis. Tyrion scratched his chin. Another prophecy about the long night. How many times must we hear that doomsday is upon us? He said this lightly, but his gaze flickered with the memory of the White Walkers. They had all learned the cost of ignoring the improbable. Felina offered a measured smile. Prophecies or not, strange things are happening. People vanish without a trace, only to return with eyes like black pits and tongues that hiss in unknown languages. Braziers and hearths flicker green when certain priests chant. There have been sightings in the night of silhouettes that tower over mortal men. We do not know if it is illusions conjured by unscrupulous sorcerers or truly a new manifestation of the darkness we were warned of. Daenerys felt the old chill of dread coil in her stomach. Over the years, she and Jon had established a measure of stability precisely by staying vigilant. The last time such portents arose, they had nearly lost the stepstones. "Do you have reason to believe we can help you?" she asked, leveling her gaze at Felina. "We cannot simply dispatch armies or dragons to Volantis without cause. Westeros has only just recovered from centuries of turmoil." Felina inclined her head again. "We ask not for an army, but for knowledge and possibly a demonstration of unity." The presence of the dragon monarchs, she used the Associ term with slight deference, could quell some of the hysteria. If your dragons are strong, if the Targaryen line stands firm, it might remind the people of Volantis that the Lord of Light's flame is not the only fire in the world. Many among the temple revere you, your grace, as the mother of dragons, a figure of prophecy. Their devotion may be misguided, but it could be used to keep the peace. And if these incidents truly stem from some old shadow magic, your experience in quelling such threats would be invaluable. There it was again, prophecy. Daenerys suppressed a flicker of irritation. She had tried so hard to move beyond the illusions of destiny, to stand on the bedrock of real governance and compassion. But the Red Priests had long woven her story into their narratives. She couldn't unweave it no matter how she tried. She glanced at Jon, who gave her an unreadable look. Then she turned to Tyrion and Davos. "We should discuss this in council. I won't dismiss it out of hand, but I also won't uproot half our forces for a rumor of dark magic." Tyrion bowed slightly. "A wise approach, your grace. We'll meet this afternoon and decide how best to respond." He motioned to Felina. "For now, we'll see you to comfortable quarters so you can rest from your journey." Felina placed a fist over her heart in a gesture of respect. "Thank you. May the light bless your city, your graces." Then she was escorted out by a pair of royal guards. Daenerys gave Jon a thoughtful look. Another doomsday cult. Another set of omens. Sometimes I wonder if the realm will ever be free of them. Jon's lips quirked. We both know that so long as dragons exist, so too will the pull of magic. It's been that way since old Valyria, hasn't it? He paused. Still, we should keep an open mind. The stepstones taught us that ignoring uneasy signs can cost lives. Daenerys nodded, crossing the throne room's polished floor. I'll have the maesters consult any records they can find on recent phenomena in Essos. Perhaps we'll glean something. In the meantime, let's trust Tyrion and Davos to handle the envoy until we can discuss it in depth. She hesitated. I need to check on Aemon. I'd rather he not overhear talk of new horrors just yet. Jon offered a reassuring nod. I'll join you. They left the throne room and crossed the winding corridors of the Red Keep, stepping into the bright daylight of the courtyard. In the training area just beyond the gate, Aemon was indeed practicing aerial maneuvers with Greenfire, though from the look of it, the boy was more playing than training. He had urged the dragon low over some wooden targets set up by the King's Guard. As they watched, the dragon exhaled a quick burst of flame at Aemon's urging, sending one of the targets exploding into cinders. Soldiers applauded politely, more from loyalty than genuine surprise, but Aemon flashed a grin at them as though he had just conquered the world. He brought Greenfire down gently, hopping off in a swirl of dust. His cheeks were flushed with exhilaration, and a wild brightness danced in his violet eyes. When he saw his parents, he did an exaggerated bow. Father, Mother, did you see? I hit every target. Daenerys approached, smoothing a wind-blown strand of his hair. He was taller than before. Each day it felt as though he stretched a little further toward adulthood. "I saw," she replied with a note of pride. "But remember, hitting still targets in a courtyard is far different from real combat. We don't intend for you to see real combat soon, if we can help it." Eamon's lips twisted in mild frustration. "I know, but I want to be ready. Uncle Grey Worm always taught me that readiness can mean the difference between victory and defeat." He glanced around as if to ensure no one overheard, then lowered his voice. "Are you worried about something, Mother? I heard some men talking about an envoy, about dark magic in Volantis." Daenerys and Jon exchanged glances. The boy's ears were keener than they realized. Much like Arya Stark's had been in her youth, always eavesdropping. Jon crouched to meet Aemon at eye level. "We're not worried, just cautious. You've heard the stories of our battles, how the world is full of wonders and dangers. Sometimes those rumors come from Essos. We might need to help keep the peace." Aemon nodded, his young brow furrowing as if carefully absorbing the information. "Am I allowed to help? I could fly with you if we have to go across the sea." He said it with a sincerity that tugged at Daenerys' heart. He so desperately wanted to prove himself useful, just as Jon once had to prove himself in the Night's Watch. Daenerys placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. If we do go, it will be to assess the situation. You have lessons, training, your tutors. Besides, King's Landing needs you here, especially if we leave. The realm must see that a Targaryen remains to watch over them." That mollified him a little, though Daenerys could see the longing in his gaze. "I understand," he said, his tone carefully respectful. "Maybe someday soon then." She ruffled his hair, reminiscent of how Sansa once did for Arya in a gentler time. "Someday soon," she promised. "But not yet." Aemon's attention drifted back to Greenfire, who had begun picking at something on the ground, likely a scorched chunk of the target. With a grin, the boy bounded away to coax the dragon into more structured maneuvers, leaving Daenerys and Jon alone with their thoughts. "He's too eager," Jon observed quietly. "I can't blame him. I was too at that age. Always wanted to be part of the action, to prove something." Daenerys pressed her lips together. "He needs time to be a child. The world will weigh heavily on him soon enough." Jon nodded, but that distant look in his eyes suggested they both knew how quickly circumstances could change. For now, though, they allowed Aemon his innocent bravado and the joy of riding dragons in a safe environment. Such days were precious and heartbreakingly brief. That afternoon, a gathered council took place in a sunlit chamber near the Tower of the Hand. The walls were hung with new tapestries depicting the unification of the North and the Targaryen monarchy, images of dire wolves beside dragons. Gathered around the table were Daenerys, Jon, Tyrion, Ser Davos, Missandei's brother Darius, who had taken a position as a scribe, and a few other trusted advisors. Felina Vassar waited quietly by the door, an observer. Tyrion began with an overview of the trade proposals from Volantis, including concessions on taxes for certain luxury goods. He then shifted the discussion to the more pressing matter of the magical anomalies Felina had described. "We can't assume it's all smoke and mirrors," Tyrion said, tapping a quill against a sheet of parchment. "Given our experiences with White Walkers, the resurrected whites, and those cultists in the Stepstones, we know all too well that impossible threats can be quite real." Ser Davos frowned thoughtfully. "We also can't pack up half the realm for a journey across the narrow sea every time someone sees a flicker of unusual firelight. The realm needs us here, but ignoring it entirely might be a mistake." Daenerys drummed her fingers on the table. "We could send a small delegation, some of our dragons, a few capable fighters, and a messenger from the Citadel who understands magic better than we do. Enough to show unity and to gather real information without exposing ourselves too greatly." Tyrion nodded. "Sensible. We might also recall that the Red Priests once helped the fight against the dead in the north. Their magic isn't always malevolent. If something dire is brewing, we'd do well to learn from them." Jon leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. "We should be mindful of what we promised them, though. The Red Temple in Volantis can be political, its adherents can stir the masses as easily as quell them. We won't be used as pawns in their internal power struggles." Daenerys turned to Felina. "If I send a delegation, will the Triarchs and the High Priest accept their presence? Will we be dealing with friendly or hostile reception?" Felina dipped her chin. "You will be welcomed, I assure you. The Triarchs see your monarchy as a stabilizing force. The High Priest is more ambiguous. Some within the temple have named you Azor, a High Reborn, or the Mother of Dragons blessed by Lawler, while others resent that you do not actively promote the Red Faith. But it is precisely this factional divide that fosters chaos. Your presence could unite them, or at least force them to moderate their approach. Tyrion raised a brow. Unite them behind Daenerys as a living symbol, or turn them against her if she doesn't measure up to their prophecy? Felina's expression was grave. It's a risk, but the majority are in awe of House Targaryen. They see your dragons as living proof of Lawler's power, or at least the power of fire. The chance of serious hostility is small, provided you handle them with respect. Daenerys glanced around the table. Then I propose this. Jon and I will go with a modest entourage. Maybe no more than 100 soldiers. We'll take 3 or 4 of our dragons, the older, more controlled ones, and see the situation with our own eyes. We'll decide if the threat is real. In the meantime, Tyrion will act as regent in King's Landing. Sansa remains in Winterfell, strong as ever, so the north will remain stable. Davos, I'd like you to accompany us if you're willing, along with a learned representative from the Citadel if we can secure one on short notice. Ser Davos gave a nod, though his lips pressed into a thin line. I'll always serve where I'm needed, Your Grace, though traveling to Volantis wasn't how I thought I'd spend this season. Still, better a short journey for a safe realm than letting the unknown fester. Jon exhaled. We'll need to explain to Aemon why we're leaving him again. He won't like it. Daenerys met Jon's gaze, sympathy mingling with resolve. We can't bring him to Volantis. If there's truly dark magic afoot, that's no place for a child of 10. And if the city welcomes us in a volatile way, the last thing we need is Aemon in danger. Jon nodded. Agreed. Let him stay here with the dragons that remain. He's old enough to understand it's not an adventure or a game. This is real business and it's dangerous. Felina Vassar, who had been listening intently, finally ventured to speak. On behalf of Volantis, I thank you. We did not expect both monarchs to come, only that you might send a sign of support. Your presence will carry great weight. Daenerys offered a faint, regal smile. Very well. We'll begin preparations immediately. We sail in a fortnight provided the winds favor us. In that time, you'll guide us on what to expect from Volantis so we do not offend the Triarchs or the priests by accident. Felina bowed. I'm at your service. With the decision made, the council adjourned, leaving Daenerys' thoughts churning. She found herself restless that night, pacing the balcony while the city slumbered below. The memory of old battles pressed in on her, each recollection reminding her of the cost of misjudgment. She stared out at the blanket of stars, recalling how many times she'd prayed to them for guidance in her youth. She felt a warm presence behind her, Jon, barefoot, with a tired but patient look. You're worrying, he said gently. She turned to face him. As always. You know my mind too well. She paused, letting him draw her against his chest. I keep thinking, are we making a mistake going ourselves? We could send others, see what they report. We've fought so long to stabilize Westeros. What if we leave it open to some new intrigue while we're gone? He stroked her silver hair. Tyrion's here, and he's proven he can govern capably in our absence. The lords respect him, or at least fear his wit enough to stay quiet. If something truly threatens us from Essos, it's better we learn about it firsthand. We can't repeat the mistake of ignoring signs, not after the long night. She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. We'll do our best to keep the realm safe. He kissed her temple. That's all we ever can do. They stood there a while longer, sharing the silence. Far above them, a pair of dragons soared in a lazy circle around the Red Keep, their silhouettes outlined by moonlight. Daenerys let herself feel a flicker of pride that dragons soared again, pride tempered by the knowledge that their presence could awaken forces she did not fully understand. She closed her eyes and prayed for a safe journey, for the realm's continued peace, and for Aemon to remain sheltered from the darkness she and Jon so often confronted. When they informed Aemon of their departure, the boy reacted with a stormy gaze that reminded Daenerys of her own younger self, hurt by the sense of being excluded. But he did not argue, he had learned enough about duty to understand. Instead, he merely asked that they return quickly. Daenerys promised she would. As they embraced, she felt how thin his arms were, how small his frame remained, yet there was a wiry strength in him. She realized that one day soon he would surpass her in height, become more man than child. The notion both frightened and amazed her. Preparations moved swiftly. The royal flagship, the Silver Dawn, was ready to sail. A second vessel, the Night Wolf, gifted by the North, would accompany it, along with several smaller ships carrying soldiers and supplies. In the sky, Drogon and Rhaegal would fly with them, as well as 2 of the younger dragons who had proven disciplined enough not to cause havoc in unfamiliar lands. Viserion would remain in King's Landing, partly because he had grown somewhat temperamental with age, and partly to reassure the populace that a dragon still guarded the city. Aemon spent the days before their departure following his parents around, torn between excitement and worry. At the docks, he tried once more to volunteer his presence, but Daenerys knelt and gently cupped his face, reminding him that the realm needed at least one Targaryen in the capital. "Someday, you'll cross the sea and see the wonders of Essos," she told him. But that day isn't now. The morning they set sail was bright and crisp, with gulls wheeling overhead and the city's population thronging the harbor to watch. Daenerys wore a traveling cloak of dark gray, lined with red, and Jon wore northern leathers reinforced for flight. A gentle breeze tugged at the lines as sailors made final checks. Tyrion, standing on the dock with Sansa's envoy, gave them both a wry salute. Davos was already aboard, greeting the crew. Felina Vassar waited near the gangplank, scribbling notes for a message she intended to dispatch back to Volantis via Raven. Aemon stood by the railing, his expression caught between pride and sorrow. When Daenerys kissed his brow, he clung to her for a moment longer than usual, as if memorizing her warmth. Then, with the snap of sails, the ships pulled away from the shore. Drogon and Rhaegal took flight above them, an awe-inspiring sight that drew cheers from the onlookers. The smaller dragons followed, air scales flashing in the sun like newly forged steel. Daenerys watched the city fade behind them, the Red Keep's towers shrinking until they resembled toy spires. A soft pang struck her heart. She whispered, "Protect him," under her breath, unsure if she spoke to the city or to the gods. Jon caught her eye, gave her a supportive nod. "It won't be too long," he said, though the unspoken caveat was if all went well. Daenerys breathed in the salt air. The deck swayed gently beneath her boots. Overhead, the beating of dragon wings provided a rhythmic pulse. She reminded herself of the countless journeys she had taken by sea, some triumphant, some desperate. She thought of the time she crossed the narrow sea to claim the throne and how different she had been then, driven, wounded, sometimes vengeful. Now she felt an odd combination of hope and caution, mindful of the fragile peace she carried with her. The first days of the voyage were uneventful. Ser Davos ensured the ships kept a steady course, heading southeast. The dragons hunted fish and sea birds, occasionally diving into the waves for sport. At night, Daenerys and Jon would share what privacy they could in the captain's cabin, discussing everything from strategy to their memories of simpler times, conversations that inevitably circled back to Aemon, to the realm, to the burdens of rule. Felina Vassar visited them each evening to describe Volantis in more detail, the grand architecture, the long bridge teeming with life, the contrast between the wealthy sprawl behind massive walls and the poorer neighborhoods beyond. The Red Temple was one of the largest structures in Essos, said to house thousands of priests. She hinted that the deeper one went into the temple's catacombs, the more one encountered relics of the old empire, to say nothing of rumored magical devices from ancient Valyria. None of it put Daenerys at ease, but knowledge was better than ignorance. They were within a day's sail of the stepstones when the weather turned sour. Winds battered the sails, clouds blotted out the sun, and rain slashed across the decks. Daenerys insisted on checking on Drogon, who circled anxiously above the roiling waves. Jon, similarly concerned for Rhaegal and the younger dragons, climbed to the crow's nest to get a better view. In the gloom, Daenerys spotted lightning fork across the sky, illuminating the silhouette of a large, looming shape. At first, she thought it must be a mountain or an island, but her instincts warned her otherwise. A shout rang out from the bow, "Ship off the starboard side. Looks deserted." Davos hurried to the bow, peering through a spyglass. The shape was indeed a drifting vessel, half-battered with sails in tatters. Even from a distance, it looked like a ghost ship. "Should we investigate?" Davos asked, wiping rain from his brow. "Might be survivors." Daenerys braced herself against the gale. "We can't ignore it. If there are survivors, we can't abandon them to the storm." The Silver Dawn turned carefully, navigating the choppy sea. The dragons, alerted by signals, circled overhead, scanning for threats. As they approached the derelict ship, the stench hit them, an overwhelming reek of rot and brine. Sailors lowered a longboat, Davos volunteering to lead a small boarding party. Daenerys wanted to go herself, but Jon placed a hand on her arm. "It might be dangerous," he said quietly. "Best if Davos and the sailors handle it." She bit her lip, then relented. "Be careful," she called to Davos, who nodded before descending into the longboat. The boarding party rode through the rain-swept waves, eventually pulling up against the hull of the drifting vessel. They climbed aboard. Torches flickered in the wind as they moved across the deck. Through her own spyglass, Daenerys could see dark stains on the timbers, blood, perhaps, or something worse. Jon stood beside her, tension coiling in his posture. The dragons circled lower, clearly uneasy. After a while, Davos re-emerged, waving a torch. The men returned to the longboat and rowed back. When they climbed aboard the Silver Dawn, their faces were pale. Davos looked profoundly disturbed. "The crew is gone," he reported, but not in a normal sense. "Their bodies, some were torn to pieces, others, there's no sign of them at all, just bits of cloth and dried blood. We found marks on the walls, odd carvings we couldn't decipher. And one body in the captain's cabin looked like he'd been dead for weeks, but hardly decomposed. His eyes were open, completely black, like ink." And Davos's voice lowered as he glanced at Daenerys. He was holding an orb, black glass or crystal. When we touched it, it crumbled to dust. The memory of the Stepstones cult sprang to Daenerys's mind, and her heart kicked against her ribs. "Black crystal orbs," she murmured, haunted by the recollection of those dark weapons that hissed with malevolent power. "Whatever we faced before, someone's reusing that magic. Or a related spell. Gods be good." Felina, who stood to the side, blanched. "We must press on to Volantis. The Triarchs and the Red Temple must know of this immediately." Jon signaled the sailors to make haste away from the derelict. "Burn it," he commanded. "We can't leave the ship drifting. Put it to the torch, let the sea claim the remains." A party of archers launched flaming arrows, each one arcing through the rain-soaked air until it embedded in the vessel's timbers. Soon enough, orange flames licked along the deck, battling the downpour but eventually gaining strength as the ship's old wood caught fire. The reek of burning rot wafted over the waves. Daenerys found herself shaking with anger and dread. Whatever was happening in the east, it had found them at sea already. The storm worsened, buffeting the Silver Dawn and the accompanying ships. By nightfall, the sailors struggled to keep the vessels from drifting off course. Torrential rain hammered down, and the dragons, miserable in the deluge, sought what refuge they could on the ship's decks, glaring at the dark sky with bright, angry eyes. Daenerys and Jon did their best to stabilize them, using tarps and careful coaxing. Drogon was especially restless, occasionally letting out roars that seemed to challenge the storm itself. Amid the chaos, Daenerys felt a tightening in her chest. She remembered the terror of the great grass sea storms, the nights she huddled in thatched huts, praying to survive. But now she was no frightened child. She was a queen, a mother, a dragon rider. She forced herself to focus on calm. The crew needed that from her. She was grateful for Jon's steady presence at her side. Together, they manned the rails, calling out to keep morale from shattering. By dawn, the tempest had eased. The sea was still rough, but a watery sun struggled through thinning clouds. The crew moved like specters across the deck, exhausted but determined. One of the smaller ships had taken on water and lagged behind. No one had been lost, but the mood was grim. They hoisted sails again, adjusting course. Davos estimated they had been blown further south than intended, and they might need another 2 days to reach Volantis. In a moment of respite, Daenerys surveyed the horizon. The once familiar sense of excitement she felt when traveling to new lands was swallowed by a nagging dread of what awaited them. If the presence of black crystal orbs was any sign, some malignant force was at work in the world again. She wondered if these orbs were connected to the Red Priest's visions, if perhaps a splinter group of shadowbinders, warlocks, or necromancers was exploiting the latent magic that had grown stronger with the dragon's resurgence. She found Jon near the prow, quietly feeding regal strips of cured meat. His cloak was soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, but he looked resolute. She joined him, holding out a hand for Regal to sniff before running her fingers over the dragon's scales. The creature blinked slowly, as if relieved to see her. "He's unsettled," Jon said, stroking the dragon's neck, as if he can sense something off in the air. Daenerys nodded, feeling the same prickle along her own skin. "We should reach Volantis soon. If the Triarchs or the Temple can shed light on these orbs, maybe we can figure out how to stop this before it spreads." Jon's jaw tightened. "It reminds me too much of the Army of the Dead. Different means, perhaps, but the same corruption of life, and you saw what it took to stop that." She laid a hand on his arm. "We have dragons and alliances now. We're not alone. And we won't let this rot infest Westeros." He covered her hand with his own, and they shared a moment of warmth in the drizzle. Beyond them, the sea stretched gray and endless, its surface marked by the scars of last night's storm. The memory of the derelict ship and its black-eyed captain returned, a harsh reminder of how easily life could be snuffed out or twisted. Daenerys inhaled sharply, reaffirming the vow she'd made years ago, to protect the living from such horrors, no matter the cost. 2 days later, The city of Volantis rose on the horizon like a shimmering mirage. Tall walls of black stone, an immense bridge spanning the Rhône, towers topped with gold domes, and a sprawl of buildings fanning out from the main gates. Even from a distance, the size of it dwarfed King's Landing. Ships crowded the wide harbor, many flying the striped sails of Volantis, others from distant corners of Essos. Great fires burned atop watchtowers, sending plumes of smoke into the sky. As the Targaryen fleet approached, the thunderous roars of Drogon and Rhaegal announced their presence. Word must have spread quickly, for a crowd gathered along the wharves and parapets to witness the dragon's arrival. Daenerys saw banners snapping in the wind, the orange and black of Volantis, the swirling patterns of various trading guilds, and here and there, a red banner marked with the symbol of R'hllor. The Red Temple, Felina had said, was the beating heart of faith in the city. Under Davos's guidance, the Silver Dawn eased toward a grand pier flanked by statues of tigers, each carved from black marble. Soldiers in scale armor stood at attention, and a small coterie of officials awaited them. Daenerys donned a cloak of black with red trim, pinned with the three-headed dragon sigil. Jon wore similar attire in dark gray, signifying both the North and Targaryen allegiance. Felina joined them, nerves clearly taut. When they stepped onto the dock, horns blared a brassy welcome. Daenerys's gaze swept across the gathered onlookers. Some stared in awe, others in fear, a few in reverence, kneeling or bowing their heads. She noticed quite a few red priests in the crowd, wearing the signature crimson robes that gleamed in the sunlight. One among them, a tall man with a shaved head and eyes the color of coals, stood at the forefront. A triangular amulet of R'hllor hung from his neck. He stepped forward, flanked by temple guards bearing spears. "Mother of Dragons," he intoned, voice echoing over the hush of the crowd. "Jon Targaryen, called Snow by some, welcome to Volantis. I am Benero, High Priest of the Red Temple." Daenerys recognized the name. She had heard rumors that Benero once preached she was Azor Ahai reborn, urging the masses of Volantis to rally to her cause when she was still across the sea. She inclined her head politely. "High Priest, we come at the behest of the Triarchs and your envoy, Felina Vassar. We thank you for your welcome." Benero's dark eyes flicked to Felina, who lowered her gaze respectfully. Then he looked to Jon. "All in good time we shall meet with the Triarchs. But first, the temple extends its hospitality. We have prepared an escort to the Great Red Temple, should you wish to witness the flames that guide us all." Tyrion wasn't there to give his usual sardonic commentary, but Daenerys could practically hear his voice in her head, warning her to tread carefully. She glanced at Jon, who gave a subtle nod as if to say, "Let's keep them close for now." "We would be honored," Daenerys answered with a diplomatic smile. "Though we must speak with the Triarchs soon. We bring important news regarding a threat that may concern all of Essos." Benero dipped his chin. "Indeed, we have heard rumors. Darkness stirs. The flames have shown us glimpses." He gestured, and temple guards parted to reveal a large palanquin, richly adorned with red and gold cloth, while the city's officials stood by stiffly, clearly somewhat resentful that the Red Temple had inserted itself before the Triarchs could offer their own greeting. Daenerys recognized the tension. Volantis was not a city with a single ruler, but a delicate balance between religious, political, and mercantile powers. With measured politeness, Daenerys, Jon, and a handful of their knights followed Benero's lead, mounting a group of fine horses provided by the temple. Daenerys would have preferred to walk among the people or ride Drogon overhead, but she sensed it was important to respect local custom. Drogon and Rhaegal, too large for the city streets, took wing, circling the city walls with their younger counterparts. Daenerys mentally reassured herself that the dragons could come if needed. They proceeded through the city in a slow cavalcade. The roads were broad, paved with stones that gleamed dully under the sun. The architecture towered above them, tall buildings with carved facades, balconies draped with silks. Yet Daenerys could see the poverty, two ragged children peering from alleys, laborers in chains or half-chains reminiscent of the centuries-old custom where Volantis once enslaved entire populations. Though the city had rebranded itself somewhat after the wars, vestiges of the old empire's cruelty remained. Her stomach twisted at the sight. She recalled her vow to break chains, but she was no longer the conqueror sweeping across Essos. She was here under the guise of diplomacy. Even so, anger simmered beneath her composure. Jon, riding beside her, must have noticed. He leaned close, murmuring, "One battle at a time, my queen. We can't free the entire world in a day." She bit her lip but nodded. "I know. I haven't forgotten what we fought for." Ahead, the massive red temple loomed. Its walls were carved from a deep ruddy stone, pillars flanking a colossal set of doors that each bore the flame sigil of Lawler. A broad plaza spread before it, filled with supplicants, priests, and curious onlookers. Enormous braziers lined the steps, their fires blazing despite the heat. As the group dismounted, Benero raised his arms in a gesture of invocation, chanting in a language Daenerys recognized as High Valyrian mixed with something older. A hush fell over the plaza, broken only by the low crackle of flames. Inside, the temple was vast, lit by row upon row of red candles. Incense drifted through the air, and the polished floors reflected the dancing light. Priests in red robes lined either side of the main aisle, chanting low as Daenerys and Jon walked, flanked by their knights. At the far end of the hall stood a massive statue of a faceless figure wreathed in flame, the representation of Lawler, the Lord of Light. Before the statue burned an ever-blazing fire in a circular pit, its embers crackling with unnatural intensity. Benero guided them closer. "Come, gaze upon the sacred flames. They have revealed truths to me of old. Perhaps they will speak to you as well." Daenerys was no stranger to prophetic fires. She remembered a time in Qarth, the Warlocks, the House of the Undying. She remembered the visions that led her astray or saved her, depending on how one interpreted them. Jon stood beside her, his expression unreadable. She took a step forward, letting the heat wash over her face. The flames seemed to surge, and for a moment, she thought she caught a glimpse of something. A swirl of shadows, shapes that might have been dragons or men, a flicker that looked like ice. Then it was gone, and all she saw were roaring tongues of orange and gold. Benero's voice rose in a chant. "Lawler, reveal your truth. Show us the path. Guide the mother of dragons and her king to the light." His eyes nearly rolled back in his head, and the chanting priests fell silent. The flames rose higher, shifting colors from deep crimson to a sudden burst of green. A collective gasp shuddered through the temple. Daenerys felt her pulse skip. Green flame like wildfire, but somehow different, more alive. Then the color faded back to normal. Benero let out a breath, as though awakened from a trance. "What did you see?" Jon asked quietly. Benero blinked. Darkness across the sea, coiling around a black stone city, a tide of shadows creeping inward. And at the heart of it all, a shape in the gloom, eyes like twin voids, devouring light. He swallowed, focusing on Daenerys. He who stands in defiance of the flame, the one who dims the dawn. Daenerys' skin prickled. She had never heard that title before, but something about it resonated with the nightmares she'd harbored since the Stepstones. "Is this force connected to the black crystal orbs we've encountered?" she asked, her voice echoing in the hushed space. Benero exhaled slowly, as if summoning knowledge beyond mortal comprehension. "Yes, these orbs, or stones of night, are said to be conduits for an ancient evil that predates even the Valyrian freehold. Legends speak of shadow-wrought powers that once thrived in Sithorios or the uttermost east, beyond the Red Waste. Whether that evil is the great other we name in the faith, or some other entity, is uncertain. But it thirsts for destruction, for the extinguishing of fire and life itself. The flames show me that it stirs because your dragons have rekindled magic in the world. As light grows, so does shadow." Jon glanced at Daenerys. "We've heard something like that before, but never so directly. If your temple believes this enemy is rising, how do we stop it? We can't fight in abstraction." Benero's voice was solemn. "You wield living flame in your dragons. That may be the only force capable of countering this shadow. But you must learn more, gather allies. The Triarchs can lend support, but some among them fear the Red Temple's power, fear your arrival will spark revolution. Others, especially those who cling to the old ways of slavery, despise your legacy of liberation. The path will not be simple." Daenerys clenched her jaw. "I did not sail here to bend to the politics of Volantis. I came to protect both Westeros and Essos if we face a common threat. Tell me, High Priest, does your vision offer any practical means to fight these manifestations of evil? Where do we begin? He gestured toward the flame once more. The answers lie in the ancient lore. There is said to be a relic hidden deep in the catacombs beneath the great temple, an artifact connected to the forging of Lightbringer, the Sword of Heroes. If you were truly the prince that was promised, or the princess, as some say, then this relic might guide you. But it has been lost for centuries. We do not know if it is even real or merely legend. Still, if you would search, the temple's labyrinth is open to you. Daenerys exchanged a glance with Jon. The notion of rummaging through ancient catacombs for a mythical relic felt dangerously reminiscent of the hunts for dragonglass and whites that nearly killed them before. Yet she couldn't ignore the possibility that it might provide the knowledge they needed. We'll meet with the Triarchs first, she said. Then we'll decide our next steps. Show us to them. Benero's composure faltered slightly. As you wish, but they will not greet you with the same reverence. Be prepared. With that ominous caution, Benero led them out of the temple, the priests chanting resuming behind them. Outside, the crowd had swelled. Word had spread that the Targaryen dragons were in Volantis. People called out in High Valyrian and the local dialect. Some pressed forward to see Daenerys' face, to touch the hem of her cloak. Others glared or spat, cursing the foreigners who arrived in the company of the Red Temple. Soldiers cleared a path, and Daenerys was reminded of the precarious balance between worship and hatred that the symbol of dragons so often evoked. Their group continued through Volantis' grand avenues. Towers of black stone rose on either side. The famed Long Bridge stretched in the distance, bustling with pedestrians, shops, animals. Felina Vassar pointed out the Triarch's palace atop a hill that overlooked the river, a sprawling compound surrounded by tall iron fences and guarded by mercenaries in polished armor. The Triarchs were elected rulers, but in practice their elections were often bought or influenced by the aristocracy. As Daenerys and Jon approached, they could sense the tension, as if the palace itself braced for potential upheaval. Inside, the Triarch's audience hall glistened with mosaics of tigers and dragons, a testament to Volantis' old ambition to restore the Valyrian Empire. 3 individuals sat on elevated seats, 2 men and 1 woman, each dressed in finery that dripped with wealth, rings, gold thread, embroidered robes. Their expressions ranged from wary to openly disdainful. Daenerys inclined her head courteously. Jon followed suit, though his posture remained resolute, as if reminding them that he was no mere consort. One Triarch, a lean man with hawkish features, spoke first. Queen Daenerys Targaryen. King Jon, you honor us with your presence, though we regret the manner of your invitation was so urgent. I am Triarch Massaro. This is Triarch Resner and Triarch Bellaria. Bellaria, a striking woman with jet-black hair, surveyed them coolly. We hear you carry news of dark happenings at sea. And Benero's constant chanting about apocalyptic visions has stirred unrest in our city. I trust you do not intend to inflame the situation further. Jon didn't rise to the bait. We came because your envoy requested our help in containing a threat that could endanger not just Volantis, but the wider world. We've encountered black crystal, orbs, and evidence of twisted sorcery. We suspect it relates to the troubles plaguing your city. Resner, a burly man with a gold chain across his chest, gave a dismissive sniff. Sorcery? More likely pirates or bandits stirring trouble, seeking to spook the gullible. Our city's defenses are strong. We do not need foreign dragons breathing fire on our doorstep, especially if it means empowering the Red Temple's influence. The priests already think they rule Volantis. Daenerys set her jaw. We have no desire to overthrow your governance, but we won't stand idle if an evil force is on the rise. We have fought against living shadows before. We know the cost of ignoring them. Massaro leaned forward, eyes narrowed. You speak of cost. The cost to Volantis might be high if your presence sparks revolt among the freedmen, or if the temple uses you as a banner to rally new zealots. We recall how you once broke the chains of Slavers Bay. Some here view that as heroism, others see it as a threat to our traditions. Ser Davos, standing behind Daenerys, raised his voice. With respect, Triarch, tradition is a poor excuse for slavery. Daenerys Targaryen ended that vile practice in Meereen and the surrounding cities. She has not come here to tear down your laws, but to help you survive. If that assistance offends your tradition, perhaps the problem lies with the tradition itself. Resner flushed with anger, while Bellaria smirked slightly, as if finding the exchange entertaining. Benero, who had accompanied them, remained silent, letting the tension build. Daenerys took a measured breath. I'm aware that Volantis retains forms of bonded servitude, half-chains, indentures. I will not say I approve, but I came here for a different threat. We do not seek war with you. But if the darkness I've seen claims your city, those chains will be meaningless in death. Bellaria drummed her fingers on the arm of her seat. Let us set aside the matter of slavery for the moment. Suppose this threat is real. What is it you propose exactly? Jon spoke calmly. Cooperation. If your city is under siege by a cult or an old power, you'll need more than armed soldiers. You'll need knowledge, coordination with the Red Temple, perhaps alliances with other free cities who have reason to fear. We can act as mediators, bringing experience in dealing with the supernatural. All we ask is that you let us investigate the reports, work with your guards, your local authorities. Let us share the burden of learning the truth. Massaro steepled his fingers. You want free reign in our city? Daenerys met his gaze evenly. Not free reign. We'll respect your laws, your sovereignty. But we must be able to speak to witnesses, inspect places suspected of harboring dark magic, coordinate with Benero's priests as needed. Bellaria exchanged a look with the other Triarchs. I see no immediate harm in that, so long as we set limits. I won't have foreign soldiers marching through Volantis as if they own it. You'll have a limited escort, 50 men at most. Your dragons can remain on the outskirts or wherever dragons roost. We will not have them perched on our towers, scaring the populace into revolt. Daenerys could sense Drogon's distaste at the idea of being kept at arm's length, but she understood the concession might be necessary for diplomacy. She inclined her head. Agreed, for now. But if we face an actual threat within your walls, I won't hesitate to call on my dragons if it's the only way to protect innocent lives. Massaro sighed. Very well. Let it not be said the Triarchs of Volantis do not cooperate with allies against a common foe. You may coordinate with our city guard. Captain Garrios will be your liaison. But do not overstep, or we will withdraw our support. Daenerys forced a polite smile. Thank you, Triarchs. Benero said nothing, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction as if the Red Temple had secured a partial victory. At least they had Daenerys and Jon's assistance on official terms. As they left the audience hall, Daenerys whispered to Jon, We've opened the door, but the path is lined with daggers. We must tread carefully. He squeezed her hand. We've done that before. We'll do it again. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard. Daenerys looked up at the sky. High above, she spotted the silhouettes of Drogon and Rhaegal, their wings catching the light. It gave her comfort to know they were near, even if she had to keep them from roosting in the city's heart. She resolved to find an open field or a hilltop for them to settle, a place where they could watch Volantis without unsettling it too greatly. That evening, they were given temporary quarters in a lavish guest wing of the palace. Felina Vassar handled the arrangements, ensuring Daenerys and Jon's retinue had rooms, access to a small courtyard for training, and stabling for their horses. As Daenerys settled into a chamber draped in crimson silks, she pondered the layers of political tension in this city. The Triarchs were suspicious of the Red Temple's influence. The Red Temple might wish to use her presence to further its own ends. Freedmen and half-chained workers might see her as a liberator. Traditionalists might see her as a threat. And in the midst of it all lurked an evil that turned men's eyes black and made ships drift with half-devoured corpses. She and Jon sat down at a small table to share a simple meal of spiced fish and wine. The room's tall windows overlooked the city, lights flickering in the growing dusk. We should start our investigation tomorrow, Jon said. Speak to the city guard. See if we can find leads on who might be trafficking in black crystal orbs. Daenerys nodded. And I want to question any survivors who claim to have seen unnatural phenomena. We'll need Benero's help. His temple must know something about these orbs if they're truly anathema to their faith. Jon sipped his wine. It feels like a race. We have to learn as much as we can before the Triarch's tolerance for us runs out. Daenerys looked at him across the soft glow of candlelight. She thought of how many obstacles they had faced, how many times they'd fought for the living. We'll do what we must, for our son, for Westeros, and for anyone else this darkness threatens. Jon reached across the table, and their fingers interlaced. They shared a quiet moment, a sense of unity stronger than the swirl of politics outside the door. Daenerys let the warmth of his hand ground her, reminding her that no matter the turmoil, they stood together as they always had. The morning came with a hazy dawn, a white film of mist clinging to the Rhoyne. Daenerys rose early, dressing in a more practical outfit, leather breeches, boots, and a tunic embroidered with subtle Targaryen sigils. Jon wore similar attire, northern leathers well-suited for riding. They took a small detachment of their knights, fewer than a dozen, and followed Captain Garrios, a stiff-backed Volantene officer in scaled armor, through the city to inspect reported sites of strange activity. Their first stop was an alleyway near the fish market, where local rumor claimed a man had been found babbling about deep voices in the darkness. The alley reeked of refuse and fish guts. Garrios introduced them to a watchman who explained that the man had clawed at his own eyes, screaming of serpents that whispered in his sleep. He vanished soon after, leaving only bloody footprints. Daenerys knelt, studying the grime and dried blood on the cobblestones. She could feel no tangible magic, only a chill creeping along her spine. They continued to a nearby shrine dedicated to some local deity, now defaced with bizarre symbols scrawled in black. At a deserted courtyard, they found a broken orb of smoky glass, shards scattered around a scorched patch of earth. One shard still glimmered with unnatural fractal patterns. When Jon picked it up, it dissolved into ash in his palm, leaving a bitter odor in the air. "Same as the stepstones," he muttered. "Whatever these orbs are, they decay once separated from their source of power." Daenerys frowned. "But whose power is fueling them here?" Garrios cleared his throat. "We suspect hidden cells of fanatics. Our city has many cults aside from the Red Temple, secret societies worshipping old gods, or rumored demon summoners. Usually they're harmless, but occasionally one emerges that requires us to handle them." Daenerys recognized the pragmatic tone. "You think they might be behind the black orbs?" He nodded stiffly. "We do. But they move in the shadows and the people fear them. They whisper that these cultists can steal souls or curses. Even our watchmen sometimes vanish. We had hoped your presence might frighten them into the light." Jon let out a breath. "They might simply go deeper underground. We need a better lead." They left the courtyard, continuing their search. At midday, they stopped briefly to eat in the open-air portion of the fish market, where vendors hawked spiced eel and battered crab. The clamor of commerce filled the air, and curious onlookers stared at Daenerys and Jon with a mixture of awe and intrigue. Some recognized the Targaryen sigils on their attire and whispered among themselves, though few dared approach. As they finished a quick meal, Benerro appeared, flanked by temple guards. He inclined his head. "My lord and lady, I have learned of a witness who escaped from what may be a cult gathering in the old sewer tunnels. He's a freedman who sought refuge in the temple, terrified out of his wits. Will you come speak with him? Perhaps he will reveal more." Daenerys and Jon agreed at once. They followed Benerro to a modest building near the temple complex, used for housing refugees and the poor. Inside, they found a trembling man wrapped in threadbare blankets. His skin pallid, eyes darting at every shadow. Benerro introduced him as Cadro. The man's voice shook as he recounted stumbling into an underground chamber while searching for lost valuables. "They were chanting," he murmured, voice taut with horror. "Standing around a black flame. It flickered green at the edges, but the core was black as pitch. They had an orb in the center, bigger than a man's head, pulsing with a heartbeat. I swear I heard it, like it was alive." Jon knelt, speaking in a calm tone. "Did you see faces? Recognize anyone?" Cadro shook his head violently. "They wore masks. Animal masks, serpents, eels, dragons with no eyes. One saw me, pointed a finger, and my head filled with whispers. I felt them crawling inside. I ran. Don't know how I found my way out. My mind is all jumbled. But I remember someone saying the name Ember's Bane. That's what they called the Black Flame." Daenerys felt her heart stutter. "Ember's Bane," she repeated softly. "Do you know what it means?" she asked Benerro. The priest's face was grave. "A name from the oldest records, rarely mentioned even in the hidden texts. Ember's Bane was said to be a conjuration that devours heat and light, leaving only shadow. If these cultists have truly summoned it, then their power is beyond that of normal men." Jon stood, placing a comforting hand on Cadro's shoulder. "You did well to escape. Can you guide us to where you found them?" Cadro's eyes went wide with terror. I can try, but I won't go back down there. I can draw you a map. The tunnels are a maze of old sewers, collapsed walls, catacombs. It's all jumbled together under the city." Daenerys and Jon exchanged a determined look. If the cult was hiding in these labyrinthine tunnels, Then confronting them would require care, and possibly the aid of dragons. But taking dragons into an underground labyrinth was impossible. They would have to rely on skill, allies, and perhaps the Red Temple's own brand of fire magic. Benero clasped his hands in supplication. I shall gather priests skilled in the ways of exorcising shadow. Together, we can descend into the tunnels and destroy this Ember's bane before it spreads. Gyarios, who had arrived behind them, scoffed. You want to lead an army of priests below the city? The Triarchs will never allow it. They fear mass panic. Daenerys lifted her chin. Then we must proceed carefully. A small force, our knights, plus a handful of temple priests, coordinated with the city guard. We'll do it quietly tonight if we can. Root them out before they have time to vanish. Benero nodded, respect in his eyes. Tonight, then, we will meet at the entrance Cadro marks on his map. And let us pray that R'hllor's flame guards us from the devouring shadow. The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Cadro drew a crude map, indicating a possible route through the sewers near an abandoned section of the old city walls. Daenerys, Jon, Davos, and Benero coordinated. Each would bring a small group, no more than a few dozen in total, to avoid attracting attention. They planned to strike after nightfall, when the cult was most likely to gather. Though Daenerys felt uneasy about leaving her dragons out of the direct fight, she ordered Drogon and Rhaegal to remain on a hillside outside the city with the younger dragons. She worried about infiltration in the dark confines below ground. They could do more harm than good if forced into cramped tunnels. Instead, she arranged for the dragons to remain alert should the cult attempt any large-scale mayhem on the surface. Night draped Volantis in a cloak of flickering lanterns and hush. The streets were subdued, though the occasional reveler or watch patrol passed by. Daenerys, clad in dark leathers and carrying a dagger at her hip, led her knights quietly through narrow back alleys. Jon walked beside her, Longclaw at his side. Davos came too, watchful eyes scanning every corner. Benero and a handful of red priests joined them, each carrying torches said to be blessed with R'hllor's power. Gyarios brought a detachment of a dozen city guards, though he seemed wary of the entire operation. They reached a rusted gate in a side street. The stench of stagnant water wafted from the tunnel mouth beyond. Daenerys suppressed a shudder, pressing a cloth to her nose. Jon winced but pressed on. The group descended stone steps slick with algae, the flickering light of their torches casting writhing shadows on the curved walls. Water dripped from overhead. Rodents scurried away, squeaking in alarm. Cadro's map guided them through a labyrinth of twists and turns. Every so often, they found signs that humans had passed recently. Footprints in mud, scraping on walls, half-burned candles. Daenerys' heart pounded in her chest. She recalled the crypts of Winterfell, the damp halls of the Red Keep's dungeons, the caves beyond the wall. Every closed-in space reminded her of the vulnerability of flesh in the face of the unknown. Then, faintly, they heard chanting, a low, droning murmur that echoed off the damp stones. The group exchanged tense glances. Benero's eyes gleamed with fervor, and the red priests began whispering incantations of their own. Davos tightened his grip on the hilt of a short sword, while Jon silently drew Longclaw. Daenerys unsheathed her dagger, though she suspected she might need more than steel if they faced true sorcery. They followed the sound deeper, eventually coming to a section where the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The chanting grew louder. The flickering orange glow of torches illuminated half-seen shapes. Daenerys edged closer, peering around a corner to glimpse a horrifying tableau. Robed figures stood in a circle, wearing grotesque masks reminiscent of serpents and eyeless dragons. In the center of their circle burned a flame of unsettling color, black at the core, fringed with flickers of green and sickly purple. It gave off a low hum that resonated in her bones. One figure held a large orb in their hands. Through the shifting light, Daenerys could see it pulsing with an inner darkness, as if it were alive. The chanting rose, words that scraped at the ear. Ember's bane, devour the day, devour the flame. Benero's voice resounded, in R'hllor's name, and he and his priests rushed forward, torches brandished. Daenerys and Jon took that as the signal. They surged into the chamber with their knights, while Garrios's guards followed, trying to contain the robed figures. Chaos erupted. The cultists shrieked, some producing short blades or black-hilted daggers. The black flame flared, and Daenerys felt a wave of cold flood the room, fighting against the Red Priest's torches. She lunged at a masked cultist, disarming him with a swift slash of her dagger. Jon fought beside her, cutting down a second masked figure who rushed him with a wild howl. One of the Red Priests invoked a spell. His torch erupted with brilliant red flame that arced across the room, igniting a cluster of cultists. They screamed, flailing as the holy fire consumed them. But the black flame in the center of the chamber responded, a tendril of darkness writhing outward, snuffing the red flame in an eerie swirl of smoke. Benerro chanted fervently, sweat pouring down his face. By the light of R'hllor, begone shadow. The air heated around him, and the black flame flickered. Daenerys seized the moment, darting toward the cultist holding the orb. If she could wrest it away or smash it, perhaps the FL aim would die. She dodged a swipe from another robed figure, then closed in. She caught a glimpse of the orb, a swirling void within dark glass, throbbing like a malignant heart. The cultist hissed and raised it aloft. Daenerys lunged, but the moment her hand touched the orb, agony lanced through her arm. She cried out, feeling a biting cold that seemed to drain the warmth from her flesh. The cultist cackled, pulling back. Jon saw Daenerys stagger and leapt forward, slamming the cultist with his shoulder. The orb flew from the figure's hands, landing on the ground with a dull crack. A surge of black energy pulsed from it, momentarily stunning both Daenerys and Jon. The robed figure snarled, lunging for it again, but Davos, quick on his feet, drove his sword into the cultist's back. The black flame in the center seemed to sense its anchor in peril. It roiled violently, sending out pulses of cold that battered the Red Priests. Benerro locked eyes with Daenerys. "Destroy the orb," he shouted above the din, "only then can we banish the flame." Daenerys's arm still throbbed, but she forced herself to move. She scrambled across the wet stone floor, searching for the orb. Through the chaos of clashing steel and shrieking cultists, she spotted it near a collapsed section of wall. She crawled, ignoring the pain, while Jon and Davos fought off cultists that tried to block her path. When Daenerys finally closed her fingers around the orb, the cold seared her palm. She summoned every ounce of will. She was the blood of the dragon, the unburnt mother of living flame. A furious spark ignited within her, and she slammed the orb onto the ground with all her might. Cracks spidered through the dark glass, leaking wisps of shadow. The cultists howled in horror, their chanting turning frenzied. Another blow from Daenerys's dagger hammered the orb, and it shattered fully, releasing a keening wail that rattled the chamber. The black flame sputtered. Benerro roared an incantation, and the Red Priest's torches flared bright red, pushing back the swirling darkness. A wave of force slammed outward from the center, knocking everyone off their feet. Cultists were hurled into walls with sickening thuds. Daenerys shielded her head, feeling the cold dissipate as quickly as it had come. When she dared to look up, the black flame was gone, replaced by a swirl of acrid smoke. The only sound was the groans of the wounded and the crackle of the Red Priest's torches. Jon rushed to Daenerys' side, helping her stand. "Are you hurt?" he asked, eyes frantic with worry. She looked down at her palm, which was raw and reddened as if frostbitten. "Just my hand," she managed, forcing a shaky smile. "I've had worse." Davos stepped over bodies, kneeling beside them. "Gods, you two all right?" Daenerys nodded. "We ended it, at least for now." Benerro approached, breathing heavily. The priest's face was ashen, but relief shone in his eyes. "You destroyed the orb. The Ember's bane is banished from this place, for the time being. We must find if there are others." He surveyed the carnage. A few cultists moaned, still alive. The rest were either dead or had fled. "We'll question the survivors. Perhaps we can root out the source." Garrios and his guards moved to secure the living cultists, stripping off masks and binding them. Daenerys saw that some had black veins threading under their skin, as though they'd been partially corrupted by the orb's power. She suppressed a shudder. Jon squeezed her shoulder. "We should get you to a maester or priest to treat that hand." She wanted to protest, but her palm throbbed in excruciating pain, and her breath hissed. "Yes, let's. I don't plan to lose a hand to dark magic after all this." They began to make their way out of the chamber. Overhead, Daenerys caught sight of the swirling, ghostly smoke dissipating into the sewer's vaulted ceiling. She felt a sudden wave of exhaustion, though also a fierce sense of triumph. They had prevented something far worse from taking hold here, at least tonight. But the cost was a stark reminder that this was no ordinary foe. The question loomed: how many more orbs were out there and who orchestrated their use? Hours later, she found herself in a makeshift healing room within the Red Temple, a priest carefully salving her palm with herbal ointment that radiated gentle warmth. The frostbite-like wound was painful, but it would heal without permanent damage, the priest assured her. Jon stood guard beside her, though his tense shoulders finally relaxed a fraction when told she would be all right. Daenerys joined them after speaking with the captive cultists. "They know little," he reported. "They worship a figure they call the Dreadmaster, who taught them to harness Ember's bane. They claim he dwells in the Far East, beyond the Red Waste, in a land of black stone ruins. He sends his disciples abroad to sow chaos." That is all they would say. Daenerys' eyes flashed. The Far East. Could it be as high? Or deeper still? She remembered rumors of nightmares in the Shadowlands. Daenerys shook his head. The cultists do not know. Only that the Dreadmaster is said to be older than the current age, a being of shadow. We can glean little more from them. He exhaled a trembling breath. But if he truly resides beyond Ashai, the threat could spread across Essos if left unchecked. Jon rested a hand on Daenerys' shoulder. Then we've only stemmed one tide. We might need to go further, search out the root of this darkness. A cold shiver traced Daenerys' spine. For years, she had believed the White Walkers were the world's greatest evil, and that their defeat would bring lasting peace. Now she found herself facing a new kind of terror, one that thrived in shadow and devoured light. She thought of Aemon back in King's Landing, safe for the moment but living in a realm that might again be threatened if the scourge was not contained. "It seems our task is greater than we imagined," she said softly, flexing her injured hand. "But we won't face it alone. We have alliances here, in the Free Cities, and beyond. We have dragons. And we have each other." Daenerys inclined his head, admiration in his gaze. "If you continue your quest, know that the faithful of Lawler will aid you. Many still see you as the prophesied savior, Queen Daenerys. And King Jon, you bear the blood of the dragon as well. Together, you might be the realm's best hope." Daenerys exchanged a look with Jon. She could sense the weight settling on both of them, another prophecy, another war. Yet within that weight sparkled a shared resolve. They had fought the long night. They had survived betrayals and heartbreak. They would not yield now. She rose, gingerly using her bandaged hand. "We'll speak with the Triarchs again. They need to know the threat is real. And we'll send word to Westeros, to the Citadel, to see if any lore can help us. If this dread master truly lurks in the east, we must decide how far we're willing to go to stop him." Jon's voice was quiet but firm. "As far as it takes." The Red Temple's torches flickered around them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The scent of incense hung in the air, cloying and heavy. Daenerys closed her eyes for a moment, picturing Aemon's face, the bright, hopeful expression that asked for a better world. She opened her eyes with renewed determination. "We will not let another age of darkness descend," she said. "Not while we still draw breath." Outside, the night sky of Volantis glowed faintly with distant lanterns. Dragons circled overhead, restless. The city's future, and perhaps the future of all Essos, now rested on the decisions made in these halls. Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow had once united Westeros to stand against an undead tide. Now, they stood at the brink of another confrontation with forces that defied mortal comprehension. Hand in hand, hearts unwavering, they prepared for the battles yet to come, for the promise that the child of ice and fire might grow up in a realm free from horrors old and new. In that silent vow, they found the spark of hope that could guide them into the unknown shadows of the world, undaunted, unbowed, unwilling to surrender to any darkness that might threaten the light they had fought so hard to protect.